I'm Leon Tillman. I know many of you, but for those I don't, welcome to Colombia. I'm so glad you could be here, especially this cold morning. Apparently, the first flurries of the winter season arrived today. Oh. Yeah. So you've got to go back to the beach. You don't have to worry about it. Okay. You leave it. Okay. A few seconds on the Digital Financial Services Observatory. We were formed beginning of last year. We've done a lot of policy work on digital financial services and related topics, of which de-risking is one of them. Because you see, one of the anchors in digital financial services digital in a few weeks, because we're feverishly finishing it off and hopefully get some additional data from this event and talking to you maybe lunch afterwards too. But it's a very important subject. I can see from the folks that are here, especially from the World Bank, GIO, CFPB, OCC, of course. It's got the attention of very important role players, SSBs. Unfortunately, we couldn't get any banks to come today, surprisingly. So we've got everybody else. So we've got service providers, central banks, and the like. So I want to hand over to Professor Andy Lowe, who's the director of CITI, who will introduce the topic in a little bit more detail. And I'll sit back and let the keynotes happen, everything else happen, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Leon. Thank you, and ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Colombia. CITI, Colombia Institute for Teleinformation, houses the observatory, which Leon has created. We're very happy to do that with Leon, and we're very happy to have you here. I also want to thank parts of the team, Michael Wexler, Nora Gurung, Claire Lee, and also in particular Jason Buckwell, in managing a lot of these things, including the technology. Now, about me, I know really nothing about the subject. I've written about 33 books by now, but not about financial de-risking, and that is a disadvantage to this highly informed audience, but maybe it's also an advantage. Sometimes it is good to be a friendly, open-minded, hopefully reasonably informed person, but not be part of a club that talks to each other. It enables one to look at the elephant, not just at the trunk or the tusks, and bats. So, in this particular field, as you know better than me, there was for a long time a drumbeat of anti-terrorism, anti-tax evasion, etc., etc. And that focus got us into trouble. And then there is a drumbeat of anti-de-risking. I just Googled the term de-risking, which incidentally is not just about financial stuff, although it is used by people here is to imply financial, but there are lots of other de-risking policies around society. That it is kind of clearly considered to be a negative type implication policy, and perhaps that too is too narrowly focused. As in all specialized subject areas, proponents talk to each other, they have their own jargon, and their own facts and their own perspectives, and when that happens, effectiveness suffers, communication suffers, credibility suffers. One has to deal with the causes, not just with the symptoms. To some people, carrying large suitcases full of cash shows that the system doesn't work. But to others, it actually shows that it does work. It makes it harder to transfer money by bad actors. So we have to start perhaps with a question to persuade other people other than ourselves why these rules exist. Rich countries have been and continue to be under attack by people who often have collaborators in other countries. Rich people try to hide assets and incomes. criminals try to conduct business from offshore. Bankrupts try to hide assets. These are legitimate issues. They impose risk on rich countries, on investors and the public, 2001, 2008, etc., reflected in higher interest rates through the risk, impose revenue losses reflected in higher tax rates, impose drug problems reflected in death and social problems, reflect outflows of financial funds, an inflow of international workers at a time when industrialized countries are deindustrializing, and so some people don't like that. Look at the election results. So for societies, rich societies, to want to crack down and require banks to be very careful, or else does not sound necessarily crazy by itself. So it has to be kind of done carefully. For banks then to weigh the cost and benefit of certain partners and transactions doesn't sound crazy either. And it might, in fact, get the affected countries themselves to be tougher on cracking down on some of their bad apples. And then there's the business opportunity here. Serving these markets seems a high margin potential. Certainly, surely there will be somebody emerging to serve them profitably. And if not, then maybe the capitalist system is telling us something about the risk issues. So these are some of the questions that I would like to see and be educated on today with an open mind. It is one of the roles of academia to challenge assumptions in an informed way and to bring together experts from theory and practice. Both need each other. And bring together the approaches of multiple disciplines, here, law, economics, finance, development, political science, and more. And to look at data and figures and numbers, not at anecdotes. It is one of the roles of academia to gather advocates, to reach conclusions, but not to be an advocate itself as an institution. That, to me, would be using and abusing the credibility of the academic institution, the credibility that has been built up for centuries. Academic endeavor is a process, not a conclusion. It is a challenge of views, not a reaffirmation of preferences. So one thing that I looked for before coming here was academic research and studies and articles on this topic, and I couldn't really find very much. It's hard to prove a negative, but I haven't found anything in somewhat casual search. So I hope that this project, and Leon personally, and his team will fill that gap. I like the Al Gore phrase of inconvenient truth. I hope to hear a lot of inconvenient truth here today. And thanks for coming, for speaking, for listening, and for arguing.
Thank you, Eddie. A very profound truth. We at CITI we've had lots and lots of debates over this issue, and there's very little resource material out there. So it's foundational meetings like this where we can extract information, site visits. In fact, a lot of the folks here today I met at conferences, brought them over because there's very little out there. So hoping with our study, which Michael Wester will talk about now, we can fill that void again. We're happy to hear your thoughts. We'll go to lunch, but there's still a lot to do with the study. We're still gathering research, so any assistance you can give in primary facts would be super helpful. We hope to hear from all the experts here today. So, with that introduction, I want to hand over to Michael Wester, who's a senior researcher at CITI. Let me see how up is the laptop. And Michael, we need your password. Okay.
All right. Ignore my entrance here. At least we have security. That's a good thing. All right. Thank you, Dr. Crone. And Professor Noah. There you go. All right. So, got that going. Slideshow from the beginning. All right. How's that? coming. Just one note, we actually did invite a bank, but at the last minute, unfortunately, their representative couldn't make it. And also, I happen to know that there are bankers in the House, but I will not mention them unless they would like to reveal themselves.
Incognito.
So we do have a banking perspective. So, as Dr. Perlman mentioned, I am a research scholar here at Columbia. I work at CITI, the Columbia Institute for Teleinformation, and the Digital Financial Services Observatory. So, I want to talk with you briefly about the subject matter today and not dwell too much on the basics of what de-risking is. When I ask many of my colleagues as to what de-risking is, they give a plain meaning, which is de-risking, the removal of risk from something, and it makes it safer. But today we're talking about something which is obviously a lot more specific, and I have posted the World Bank and FATIS definition of de-risking, which refers to the phenomenon of financial institutions terminating or restricting business relationships with clients, or categories to avoid rather than manage risk. And according to FATF, they mandate that before making a decision to terminate financial services to a client should be reviewed on a case-by-case basis using FATF's risk-based approach, which is a risk ranking system. And clients who have an unacceptable level of risk are appropriately removed. And those who have an inappropriate level, they will be removed from the system and therefore it keeps it safe. But what is an inappropriate de-risking is the wholesale cutting loose of entire classes of customer without a bona fide attempt to assess each client's sector level of risk or mitigation measures. And an example is a global bank that terminates the bank accounts of all money transfer operator clients who service certain developing jurisdictions. I'd like to briefly talk about the opposing forces. It's maybe a little bit of a strong word, but to some degree they are regulation versus financial inclusion. On the regulation side, we're dealing with financial integrity and stability. It restricts access to the financial system and it excludes those who present an unjustifiable risk of causing damage to the system. It keeps the participants safer and it keeps it running smoothly. On the financial inclusion side, the goal is to expand access. Regulation is a filter. It tries to filter out dangers. And in the course of enabling this filter, sometimes there are unintended consequences of innocent parties, bottom of the pyramid, people who are filtered out from having access to the system. Now, we're always trying to find the right mixture of the restrictive nature of regulation and financial inclusion to be in a state of equilibrium. Unfortunately, that is a difficult task and it's an ongoing mission, and so it's not always perfect, but we seem to look to find that perfect place, and it's a dynamic place. Let's talk about decision drivers of de-risking and refusal to supply. De-risking is a term that is normally associated with a risk, or at least one thinks of risk because the term is de-risking. The drivers behind the decision to de-risk are regulatory, fear of being unable to meet compliance standards, satisfy regulators or full costs. There might be a fear of penalties or fines and sanctions. One of the large fines of BNP Paribas, I believe, was $8.9 billion, which some have mentioned may have had a chilling effect. Reputational risk. No institution wants to be involved with any particular issue that happens. Risk appetite is decreasing. Jurisdiction may be subject to sanctions. These are all reasons why a financial institution may choose to reduce or remove its risk and terminate a relationship with a client. However, there are more reasons than just risk, and those can be business or other reasons, which I have in the second half, which is one is that the sector or maybe the client might not be profitable, or they might not be profitable enough. There may be a change in the business model. There may be an issue of competition, or perhaps the bank may be in competition with the entities which it is restricting or withdrawing access from. All of these are drivers of de-risking. And we have chosen to use the term refusal to supply. Some others have used withdrawal or exiting, because a decision to go and de-risk or terminate services is not necessarily just about risk. It's about more things, as you can see. So the act of de-risking, which is what we call a refusal to supply, there are drivers which are multiple, and they're not necessarily related to risk, and the effect is that there is financial exclusion from the system, unwanted exclusion. And to define the entirety of the problem, it's refusal to supply services causing financial exclusion through a lack of direct digital liquidity in the financial ecosystem. I'm going to mention a couple of impacting events over the timeline. I'm going to run right through them. In 1999, FATF was founded at the G7 Paris Summit, and their goal was anti-money laundering. In 2001, terror attacks of 9/11 created a global awareness of financing of terrorism, so that became the AML and CFT, anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism. And in 2008, the global financial crisis struck. And as a result, there was an increased regulatory activity, higher capital and liquidity requirements, and some have thought that the ship of easier money had sailed at that point and we had a tighter marketplace. And in 2011, the DOJ had instituted Operation Choke Point, many of you are familiar with, which was an initiative to eliminate some of restrict access to the financial system of some legitimate businesses, which the current administration was ideologically opposed. It basically was to restrict access to the money and choke them out of existence. And on the list of these high-risk businesses was money transfer networks, which is what we'll get to a little bit later. And in 2012, FATF introduced the risk-based approach. So, who is refusing service? Entities that are refusing service are global systematically important banks, financial institutions, large multinational banks. The jurisdictions include most traded currencies, the United States, the European Union, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. Who is being impacted? Entities such as banks, correspondent banking relationships, remittance providers, money transfer operators, depending upon what you're talking about and where you're from. It could be money services businesses, payment service providers, payment institutions. There are a couple of others on the list. I'm going to skip through them because we've got a very interesting panel, and I'd rather hear from them with regard to these issues than elaborate on those. Jurisdictions include small states, such as the Caribbean, Pacific small states, Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, Middle East, European and South Asia, Southeast Asia for a couple. Let me talk briefly about the importance and reliance on remittances. So global remittances to developing countries decreased for 2 consecutive years by 2.4% to $429 billion in 2016. However, it's expected to rise to almost 5% and $450 billion in 2017. I think that the more important takeaway from this slide is the percentage of GDP. And that is because certain small countries have a very high reliance on remittances. And as you can see from the graph on the right, Kyrgyz Republic, Haiti, Tajikistan, and Nepal all rely upon remittances, and they consist of over 25% of the country's GDP. So if you remove remittances from the equation, you essentially reduce liquidity by a significant amount, and it will result in a much higher financial exclusion. And just to note, Nepal, which has a 27% reliance on 27% of GDP, is also the home country of our Nora Barum, who is one of our research assistants here and research staff. And so she helps us validate and verify that some of the research that we do is actually true from a personal basis. Thank you, Nora. For global trends of correspondent banking relationship loss by region, as you can see, Latin America and the Caribbean are primarily the most affected. However, the impact also is global, and as you can see, the brown and beige areas, which represent significant decline and some decline, impacts all regions to a very significant extent. Okay, let's get to solutions and stopgaps to counter the refusal of supply of financial services. The solutions that we found are primarily policy-based, regional-based, central bank-based, legal challenges. Some of them deal with fintech and the non-bank industry, and I will go into them into some detail as time allows. So, The first approach is to offset the rising costs of compliance. As I mentioned, as a result of the financial crisis of 2000, the global financial crisis of 2008, compliance costs have risen as a result of regulatory action being increasing, and the way to offset the costs of regulatory action and compliance is to introduce greater efficiencies into the system and collaboration between financial institutions, which creates synergies and cost savings. Some of these include improved data, improved info and data sharing, such as collectives and collaborations. I've mentioned a couple of them, such as SWIFT. The SWIFT registry removes duplication of data and efforts. The use of RegTech, regulatory technology, is highly touted, increasing the efficiency and effectiveness of regulatory compliance. There's a use of the global legal entity identifier, which is an ID for legal entities engaging in financial transactions. I'm going to just run through these quickly. There are policy-based and political solutions. That slide there is the end of Operation Choke Point. Now, here are a couple of very interesting solutions. The Development Bank-backed voucher remittance system in New Zealand had engaged in a great deal of de-risking with regard to the Pacific small states, and the Tonga Development Bank had created a solution which is temporary, but it's still effective, which is to enable remittances and vouchers within New Zealand for New Zealand residents to send money to Tonga, and residents of Tonga would go to the development bank locations to be able to receive the remittance proceeds. There's another central bank-based solution, and we've seen this increasingly in a number of different jurisdictions, where the central bank will open up an account in one of the de-risking countries, such as the central bank of Samoa with Australia. And it's not just limited to Australia. We found actually a number of other examples that unfortunately I don't have here. And then the central bank acts as a correspondent bank. In addition, I will get to actually NBFIs later. Cash carrying is still a solution. Somalia, which we'll hear about from the Minister of Somalia who is here today, the Caribbean, the Pacific Rim. A very interesting person I spoke to was Robert Bell of ClickX, who was actually using speedboats to send cash between locations, which is a little bit unusual, but if it works, it works.
Sounds like Miami Vice.
Regional centralized payments processing. There are some of our distinguished members from the Caribbean who can discuss the attempts to create regional correspondent banks or transaction hub to clearinghouses. There's a same thing we mentioned before about a regional correspondent bank in a foreign country. Instead of the central bank, the solution allows for the group of small states to create a regional correspondent bank in the de-risking country. A couple of more. Expanding the role of NBFIs in foreign banking services. Europe has taken a stance to go ahead and expand the roles of these NBFIs to actually compete to some degree with banks. And I've mentioned the IFE in Puerto Rico, which I believe we have spoken to with a couple of our distinguished panelists, and they'll be able to elaborate further. Evolution of remittances technologies and models, P2P, currency pairing and netting. We also have panels who will be able to talk about this solution. Legal challenges. This is really more of a specialized situation where certain variables will occur which will allow successful challenges, while the Hapschild challenge resulted in a settlement. We have found a particular instance where there actually was a successful case to prevent a de-risking action. And finally, we're gotten to public-private meetings, which need to be encouraged. Basically, from speaking to many of the individuals I've spoken to on both sides of the equation, actually I should say all three, regulators, bankers, and also service providers, most of them have said they really need face-to-face meetings to be able to speak about the problems and also discuss the solutions that they've implemented so that there's a comfort level on the side of the banks. Guidance from regulators, the OCC, Safe Harbor, which is an interesting solution, and I believe I've got 30 seconds. I'll mention that the Safe Harbor is a solution which institutions have desired, which will enable them something to have more of a tick box or check box ability to be able to provide some type of safe harbor against being found non-compliant, provided that they check all the items on the list. It hasn't been met as receptively as they had hoped from the other side, but perhaps there could be a compromise that is acceptable to all. I have one more slide, so it means I'm going to have to go through this one quickly too. Blockchain solutions, for the most part, have been perceived as really long-term. They're not the quick fix panacea that many have hoped that they were. In terms of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, currency fluctuations and exchanges from to and from fiat currencies, limited liquidity, all make these very difficult solutions for countries that are impacted by de-risking and financial inclusion. And finally, we have digital fiat currency, but while I would expound upon that, we do have someone who could speak upon that topic with a great deal more depth, and I'm very glad to go ahead and get to him. And that is the end of my very accelerated presentation. As I had mentioned, I was getting a great deal, too much to say, too little time. Dr. Perlman, can we continue?
Thank you, Michael. You can get a flavor of all the hard work that you've been doing for the past couple of months. And you know, a lot of folks would say some of the stuff that we put up there as far as solutions are not really solutions because they don't fit some neat hit box. But you know, our philosophy is that what's happening is very glacial as far as solutions go. So anything that moves the needle to get money to poor people, we see that as a solution. Even though it's a stopgap solution, it's a solution nonetheless, and very creative. But let me just open up the floor for questions for Michael.
You can ask. Or wait for some of our distinct panelists.
I just want to say, excellent. Excellent summary. My goodness. It was all best I've seen. Absolutely.
There's way too much to say.
No, but
and thank you all for being here because
really, very, very good.
Thank you. Yeah.
A question.
Just to point out that I believe in the EU they have provisions in their laws, in their regulations that make it against the law to deny services, to unreasonably deny services.
Yeah.
And I don't know how they're getting away with it.
Absolutely, but it's the devil's in the detail apparently.
And who determines unreasonable?
Yeah, it's you've got to essentially do due diligence, and the person who you're cutting off needs to prove that they're not risky, and that assessment is there's no checkbox to say yes they did this, therefore don't de-risk them. It's just a matter of opinion right now, and the ECJ decision, which we put up for SAFE, is kind of persuasive. It says you have to do it, and you have to do it reasonably. You can't just cut it off. So you actually need to investigate what people go through. If it involves a ping pong, not just a checkbox, so just ongoing discussion, then that's what you need to do. Typically, that's what the ECJ said. It needs to go backwards and forwards. It can't just be a checkbox. Yes, they sent a risk assessment to us. We didn't like it, so we're cutting it off. Cutting it off. You're not allowed to do that.
Essentially, there can't be an assumption that an entity is high risk just by default. There needs to be some type of investigation to be able to, after assessing, make sure that this is indeed properly identified as high risk.
Yeah. A lot of the other solutions which we'll talk about in the course of the day, like legal entity identifiers, they're still ongoing. KYC utilities, still ongoing. There's no ISO standard, as far as I understand, for LEI, and all that still needs to be done. So what we would like to do is move the needle in terms of solutions. That's the way.
Just want to react quickly to say I'm very impressed with the scope of coverage and the research so far. Two quick points that and I think you'll take into account that we can cover later during the panel discussion. One is that the World Bank in their study found that there were some reasons for de-risking that were unrelated to risk altogether.
Sure.
What they call the last man standing. I call it the herd mentality. But that's something to consider because it's a fact. No one wants to be the last one if everyone else is leaving.
Sure.
And then the second thing is just a quick note as well. Some central banks have been de-risked. So even though you mentioned some solutions, in 2016 the Commonwealth report found that there were at least 3 central banks that had been de-risked for doing the same thing that you mentioned as a solution. But we can get to that later.
Yeah, Vanuatu, I spoke to the Central Bank of Vanuatu. They were just cut off by the Bank of France. The Central Bank of Angola is just being cut off by some Portuguese banks. So it's happening. It's not just, it's not Nirvana. Get the central bank involved and you back up and run.
No. And the Caribbean, I believe, the same country would de-risk more than once as well. So, yes, too much to say, too little time, but I'll leave it to you to elaborate.
correct? One thing that intrigues me is the focus of the presentation was on small, sovereign, quote-unquote, high-risk entities, right? If you look back, if you think back to 2008 and what, unfolded there, that was not caused by small sovereign states, right? It was driven by large institutional players who hid the risk. So it becomes a political issue, right? And I'm wondering, the real risk seems to be in large institutions, not real small players. Sure.
Okay. The scope of our review is actually complete. It's not just limited. I think, though, that the impact, two reasons. One is the people that we have here today, many of them come from the small states. And the second is I think that the impact on the small states is probably more pronounced. So that might make it a little bit easier to illustrate and perceive the impact of de-risking. So I do agree with you. This is just more illustrative and representative of who we have to share this today in discussion.
Especially in smaller states, their currencies are not easily convertible. There's not much liquidity. So if you cut off the US dollar to state corridor, you've got a problem, because who else is going to buy it? Chinese, maybe, right?
Well, one of the other issues is that in many of the small states, they have fewer number of correspondent banks. And I believe that in the Caribbean, the average was something like 4 correspondent banks now, on the average or so, per jurisdiction. So if you remove one of those legs, you've got a much larger problem there. If you keep on removing those legs, you get closer to systemic issue. So that's one of the reasons why it shows, just for this purpose, to focus on the impact on some of these smaller states.
And sovereign issues too. If you cut somebody's liquidity off and they can't grow, the rating agencies move in and they cut you. So up go your borrowing costs, if you get it at all. So it's got huge macroeconomic consequences all the way down the line, not just obviously poor people, but the general economy. I think the latest stat I actually saw from Nepal was from the UN about 3 weeks ago, was that 60% of the GDP is inbound remittances. So up from, what was it, 28%?
27.2.
Yeah, much higher.
More or less.
World Bank beats UN, who knows? Whatever the stat, it's high. Okay, any other questions? Well, thank you very much for your feedback. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay, I'd like to hand over to, I'm not going to read our bios, I'm just going to read our titles. Mohammed Ibrahim, an old friend, is going to speak on de-risking in Somalia. It was ground zero, if you will, in some quarters for de-risking. So, Mohammed, over to you, sir. Mohammed, of course, is the head national ICT individual economy of Somalia.
Some of the challenges I face here is that I work in a dual role, both in research and technical. Okay. Perfect.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the Council and the Observatory for the opportunity. And I just want to share with you some ideas and some thoughts on Somalia.
You're leaning to the microphone?
The title is really de-risking and demystifying, and that's the vocative particular. So the unintended consequences of this guided government policies combined with the highly competitive banking industry have effectively destroyed the once successful remittance business set up by Somalians around the world. Is this a new problem? No. Is the implemented solution to solve the problem new? No. Good morning and warm welcome and greetings from Somalia to you. What I do want to share with you today is the following. I live in Somalia, and
the issue we're discussing theoretically and in an academic way, for me it's practical. It actually touches me, I feel it, I deal with it. So I will let you have a paper that will talk this in detail, but the 20 minutes I have, I will go through some slides just to focus on some ideas that I want to share with you. Just a brief history from Somalia about what we were doing on this issue for a long time. And there were two groups that were focused on this. The UNDP Somalia office that's based in Nairobi, in Somalia, and the World Bank. So the reason the two charts one that's longer is the World Bank invests a lot of time in this, trying to help Somalia and the UNDP as well. So what is actually the problem? The issue I want to share with you, I want to talk about, is how people perceive Somalia and the different perspectives depending on what you're looking at when you're talking about Somalia. And the reason I'm focusing on this is the importance of remittance to Somalia. First of all, some facts, let's get this out of the way very quickly. For the last few years, when the World Bank and the UNDP and other researchers were working on this area, there was some story that was not going away for a while. This issue about Somalia as a failed state, no central government, no formal financial institutions, all those facts and figures. But the reality on the ground, last week when I was in Mogadishu and I'm flying from Somalia, I see differently. I see a functioning central government, emerging formal financial institutions, other facts that probably some of you don't know. There are 1 million of us outside the country, in Europe, America, Australia, and elsewhere. And again, some of the numbers you will see that talk about the $2 per day and all these issues, but that is a fact. But we need to look at also how we're going to deal with this and how we're going to solve this problem. Now, just to put things in perspective, the remittance businesses from Somalia, they have global operations. So those dots basically show where most of them are based. I guess it's been biased, but that's to be expected in the developing countries, such where the Somali diaspora lives and that's where the money gets sent. But just one issue that might be worth remembering as we talk about this. Somalia is not a member of any regional economic bloc, and it has few formal trade deals with other nations. Why is this important? This is very important because on one hand we have a lot of money going from developed countries to Somalia, but we have also a country where we hardly exist. We're not even a member of some of the institutions. A few years back when I was a minister, we were negotiating with the WTO and WIPO and all these institutions just to get ourselves become visible. I want to talk about IMF and the World Bank for all these years.
Could you define what you mean by global operations?
Yeah, these are the remittance businesses that I'm going to talk about in a minute. I just want to let you know that they're not only in Somalia, they actually operate from around the world, from the US, Australia, New Zealand, everywhere. There are hundreds of them. And what do they do? Basically is helping the Somali diaspora, the Somali communities in those countries, send money to their moms and dads or friends and relatives back home. So this is really in a nutshell what remittance business is all about. It's the idea of saying, look, I live in New York, I'm making a lot of money, or I'm earning a reasonable amount of money, and I want to send somebody to my family in Somalia. Now, just to put things in perspective, when I left home myself, way back in the 80, 81, when I went to Australia, I used to send to my brother $5 in an envelope. Just to him. And he used to get once a month. So $5 used to keep him going for a while. Of course, things have moved on now to 30 years. But even then, there was some sort of flow, even from the denominations were lower. Now, another fact that I want to share with you very quickly is what we're talking about is money. We're not talking about commodity here. We're trying to explain to people what the remittance companies are doing is actually sending money. Not shillings as shown here, but dollars, euro, and other currencies. And if that flow stops, whatever the reason, which I will get into, the next picture happens. People move on. And they have to find living elsewhere, and they have to basically survive. Now, what I want to jump very quickly into, and I have to apologize for this disjointed way of sharing this idea with you, is basically for the same reason, because of short time, I'm trying to throw out you a lot of ideas. But if you really want to read about this, is a paper that can give you the detail. Now, because we're in a university, I want to start with this issue about the data we are dealing with and the research outputs. To be polite about it, it's a bit dubious, because really, how can you say, for example, $1.4 billion goes to Somalia every year? How do we know? How do we quantify this? And then the next one is 1.6 from the World Bank somewhere. So first of all, we have to be careful about the facts we're using and the data we're relying on. So since we're in university, I would like to encourage perhaps some rigorous work in this area to actually come up with numbers. And if you go back almost a year ago to the day, in fact, to the 21st November 2007, there was that paper that talked about why remittance matters. And I would encourage you to look at this to get the background why remittance matters. Now, narrowing down to where I'm from, in Somalia, what we are dealing with, it's a case where I'm meeting with saying remittance matters and it's a lifeline. The governments, whether you're in New Zealand, Australia, US, or in Europe, they're saying that's fine. We want to encourage the Somali communities to do business and set up remittance companies and give them licenses. So far, so good. And then after a while, we say, but sorry, but you can't send this money. Why not? Because the banks close to your accounts, but it's a free country. We are in a democratic society, and here is the US, the land of opportunity. It's your money. Do whatever you want to do. This is Australia, the land of milk and honey. It's your money. Do whatever you want to do. So what do people do? They're desperate. They put their money in a bag and they fly. And this is where the theme of my discussion is about. This is the unintended consequence. What do we as governments, now if I put my hat as a government officer, what do we want to do? What do we really want to achieve? We want to live in a peaceful society. We want to make sure that everyone is safe. We want to make sure that money gets from A to B, or from someone who earns the money to their moms and dads. But the unintended consequences, that's not happening. Even worse, the reason governments set up, Australia for example, we have something called Austrac, and here I'm sure you have the equivalent, where the entities that monitor the flow of currency or money or financial instruments, everything was fine. So if I was in Melbourne or Sydney and I'm running a remittance company, every time money gets sent from Australia to Somalia, there's a report that goes to Australia. So they knew X, Y, Z, A, B, C, send $5, $10, $20, whatever it is, this month. So far, so good. Now, the banks say, sorry, but we closed our accounts. So what happens? Australia, and with all the wisdom of the Australian government, or for that matter, Europe and America, say, well, no, it's still your money, do whatever you want to do. So that means no reporting. So what was the idea of having this authority that monitors the financial flow to make sure that we know who's sending money to whom? Now we're saying, no, this is okay. So in every society, in every business, there's always one or two bad apples, or someone who wants to spoil the fun. So they will say, this is good now. The authority is saying, whatever you want to do, well, let's do it. So system can be abused. What it really means is the system has failed. It failed dramatically. Way back, I was lucky or had the opportunity to actually meet the current Prime Minister of Australia when he was the Minister of Telecommunication. When we talked about this issue, and I highlighted what the problem was. I said, look, this is a bad policy. If we go this way, we will produce almost exactly the opposite of what we're trying to achieve. And that's what happened. Now, moving forward, now, I just want to quickly mention some reports that, again, talk about this, and I will encourage you to read this, and then we'll in detail explain what the problem is. I can't even say better than this quote from this report, what actually risking is. The reason I don't want to talk about risking is it's been covered by the previous speaker, so I won't bore you with the detail, but I will encourage you still to just read what risking is. Now, if the idea is if the bank can say, you look too risky for me, I can't do business with you, I need to go one step further. I want to know on what ground, where's the rule, where's the law, where's the legislation. Now, the governments are too lazy. They're not really coming forward. They're not really saying, look, there's a law. Because my position is this. If the bank can say, I will not do this with you, then the government should say, okay, well, there must be a reason why you're a bad business, therefore we should take your license off. But on the one hand, if you allow me to have a license to collect the money, and you're quite happy to take tax from me, and then you say, oh, by the way, sorry, but the bank, I cannot force the bank. That's what the government is saying. To me, I would say that's really very lazy. What it really means is cover. What the government is saying is, we are not really caring, too small to worry about. But the bank is too big to fail. So when the bank's in trouble, the government will say, no, we really have to do something. And that's asymmetry. That's what I don't like to see. I want to be a fair system where the level playing field, where we can do the same thing, regardless of whether we big business or small fish. We should be all at the same rule of law. Now, more reports. The reason I'm looking at these reports is there's some discrepancy. This is a good example. For example, the report from the Scandinavian country, where if you read the whole report that deals with Somalia's partnership also, on page 11, there's one sentence that talks about remittances. And in the scheme of things, that to me is the biggest item that we need to talk about. So you can see how we've written this. We don't actually pay a lot of attention to this issue. And I think it's time to change that, and with the help of the universities and academia, to come up with credible research, reliable data, to inform our representatives in Congress or parliaments or wherever we live, to come up with some policies that work for the people who are trying to save money, the businesses that are doing the money remittance, and those more vulnerable who are waiting for the $10 or $20 or whatever it is from their families to survive. And that's where we're missing out. Because if you really look at all the literature, there's some sub-theme that you'll see that people will say, we're not joining the dots. I always wanted to know where the dots are, so I can quickly join them and say, look, this is what we need to do. Way back when I was in the government myself, I know we are all guilty of a slow process. When things happen, we're too slow to legislate. But in this case, I think the risk is too high. And the impact is greater. Just something that we all know, but just remind ourselves. If you lose, if you're in New York and you lose $10 or $20, we'll say with the PPP or the purchasing power parity, it's nothing but this cup of coffee from Starbucks, it doesn't matter. The average Somali in Mogadishu or Hargeisa, if you lose $10, that's a lot of money. This is just simple fact that I cannot get through some of my local MPs in Australia or I'm sure a lot of other decision makers in America. Why? Because it's just too far. The map I was showing to you, Somalia is way back. Some might only remember because it's somewhere in the equator, and that's not really fair. Now, very quickly, Somali remittances are critical to Somalia for all these reasons. I want to read them again. But I just want to mention something that probably many of you might not know. We have a thriving, emerging, and very interesting development in mobile money, where a lot of remittances is now happening through mobile money. I'm mentioning this because, again, as a global citizen, I would consider myself as a global citizen. I travel a lot, I live in different countries. Again, there's some inherent risks here where governments, again, are too slow to react and they have to do something about this. I will go through more of that in the paper and I will allow you to read that. Some other charts and numbers here about money and where it comes from. Very quickly, I want to just tell you about this, where although there are problems, some of my folks actually see opportunities as well. We actually look at this as, yes, it's like the Chinese risk and opportunity being the same word. So we don't actually see as a problem only. Now, it's all not talk, and we don't want to just talk about problems. Here from Mogadishu, I want to see some solutions for a change. I want to come up with some ideas, and hopefully through you, we can let the authorities know about this. We need close collaboration across countries. For example, the Somali remittances in the US or EU or Australia, we need to work with the governments to understand what it is these people are doing. So if you are in Minnesota and you're sending $2 million a month or something on an Emirates flight, the risk is not only that this money might get lost. That's a huge risk, because if 2 million is lost, that could be hundreds of thousands of Somalis will be impacted. But the risk is more than that. And this is where joining the dots is missing, because the risk is also on the airline, on the airport, on the taxi, on everyone who's involved in the whole supply chain. Because you don't walk around with $1 million in a bag in any city, I won't in a city, but wherever it is. So there's a huge problem. We also need the support of the World Bank and the UNDP and all those other people to come up with new ideas. What's missing in this area is there are no creative new ideas. We're still trying to do the 70s, 80s, 90s ideas to solve a problem that people moved on into cryptocurrencies and mobile money and all these things. I want to say, oh no, just close their bank accounts, that will solve the problem. Well, it didn't, because people are creative. While we're sitting here right now, I can send money from my mobile phone. In Mogadishu, I can pay a friend of mine in Mogadishu for his coffee or her coffee. And I'm here in New York, I know lots of rules will be broken, but that's the reality. So we need new ideas. If we don't, and we're trying to do the same thing and expect a new outcome, that was, who said this, Einstein, to paraphrasing, the definition of insanity, basically it won't happen. So we need to integrate our governments and our authorities. The most important issue for me, the message is really to get the banks to treat Somali remittances as a legitimate businesses. We need to remove the idea that says there's always something new. Now, joining the dots, the risk actually can contribute to something like this. You're all familiar with this, so I won't explain what that is. So there's a link between this. There's also an idea that says all markets, whether you are in that small market in Mogadishu or whether you are in this famous other market, they all need some liability, certainty, and trust. And again, governments can do, and they should regulate markets, and they do that when they want. They always come in when they're too big to fail, but some other businesses are too small to be noticed. Therefore, they're risking in this financial inclusion. Why? Because someone could have received some money from their brother or sister or friend, it's not getting it. That's inhuman. As far as I'm concerned, it's really like refusing medicine to a sick person. So we need to humanize this and come up with another way of dealing with this. Now, let me just conclude. I'm from Africa, so I can't, as my friend from South Africa, I can't let this go without not saying it's about the same issue about the dog and the fish, and asking the dog asking the fish, what's the water like? And the fish replies, what water? So when I go to the 4 big banks in Australia, I say, well, why can't I get MSP account? They say, well, what's the problem? In fact, I did as a research, I tried to get it. Up to now, we're still waiting. It will never happen. So there's a gap in the law. There's an issue that we really need to address, and we need to address very, very quickly. Why? Because if we just say de-risking, well, that can no longer be seen as a common sense business or international virtue. It's not. It's almost a crime. Governments can no longer outsource their ethical responsibility for their most vulnerable citizens to a sector whose unexamined and corrupted policies are having such dire consequences. It's time to stop confusing risking with disengaging and treat risk more responsibly. I stop here, and I'm available if there are questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just in the interest of time, we're going to open the questions on the panel discussion. So, thank you so much. That's the response that we've covered and more. Thank you. Can I ask John Robb from John, of course, is the governor of the Central Bank of Commerce, to give his address.
Good morning.
First of all, thank the Columbia University School of Business for hosting this event. And the advantage of going third on the program is that a lot of the definitional issues have gotten dealt with already. So I'm going to, even though I have a presentation that touches on a lot of these, I won't dwell too much on them, but just give you an outline, look at a little bit of the economic profile of the Caribbean region, which is important for you to get an appreciation for size. And even though I'm talking about the Bahamas, I need to insert in here the Caribbean because some of the issues that we face relate to the regional profiling insofar as corresponding banking services are concerned. I also want to talk a little, spend most of my time really, once we get beyond the next bullet, talking about some of the responses at the policy level and strategically within the Bahamas and to some extent Caribbean-wide initiatives. The point that's important to mention here is that we're dealing with economies in the Caribbean and the Bahamas that are for the most part foreign exchange dependent, services driven in the exports, tourism being the most important service for most of the region. And in the case of the Bahamas, you have financial services as an added element. We're a very small country, the Bahamas. Less than 400,000 persons, population, GDP per capita around about 28,000 US dollars. Tourism is about 40 to 60% of the economy. And financial services estimated between 15 to 20% of the economy. This is a snapshot of the profile of the financial services sector in the Bahamas. So when you hear some of the numbers being thrown about the number of institutions that are impacted, please bear this in mind. In our domestic banking sector, which basically refers back to the 12 billion or so in GDP, there are only about 16 institutions that operate. And in that 16, there are about 7 commercial banks and about 3 or 4 money transmission or money services businesses. The Bahamas is more known internationally for the 200 plus international banks, or as you might term them, offshore banks that operate. And you can see the relative magnitudes in terms of the balance sheet size of those. But from a financial services perspective, or from an employment perspective, even though you might get the impression of how sizable and valuable international banking is to us, you can see that the majority of the employment within our financial services sector on a scale basis is really the domestic intermediation activities. And this is just showing a snapshot of what's happening in the banks, but beyond the banks, you have the other financial services, whether it's insurance, securities, and the like, and those ratios hold out for the most part. Now, in terms of on the de-risking side, thanks to the first presentation, I think we have a fairly good appreciation for some of the drivers. The one that I think that I would also highlight here is that if you're in the Caribbean, your profile as regards AML and terrorist financing risk is also a regionally constructed profile. And it's also a profile that is constructed to some extent, and this is literally feeding off the FATF guidance, the perceived cooperation or non-cooperation of these jurisdictions insofar as the OECD's tax initiatives are concerned. That's very important if you want to look at it from an advocacy point of view, because it's really the Financial Action Task Force that is more focused on the criminal elements in terms of the abuse of the financial services system. Yet, in the FATF guidance and the like, they say one of the factors you should consider when you think about whether a jurisdiction is high risk is where do they fit in terms of the OECD's criteria for cooperation. So that, I think, brings some problems into the picture insofar as countries may find themselves high risk, not necessarily, or perceived as high risk, not necessarily because they're facilitating the criminal transactions and bloody money type or some other type, but just because of the tax transparency issue. And I'm saying that, and I will qualify that later, but these jurisdictions do have very good records as far as tax cooperation is concerned, and they work within the global framework to try and improve their systems for tax cooperation. What we did in the Bahamas was we tried to get a feel for how the de-risking or the shifting correspondent banking relationships have been impacting our sector. And first survey we did in 2015, we got a good feel, and on the surface you may say, well, the numbers don't look too frightening until you drill down and you say, wait a minute, and this is Caribbean-wide. If your institution is one that is standalone, meaning that it operates only within the jurisdiction, it's probably incorporated within the jurisdiction. If it is indigenous or owned by shareholders from within the jurisdiction, then whatever the numbers you see put out, those averages, those fall disproportionately on those subsectors of the banking community. What we found when we first did the survey in 2015, there was some impact. We got a feel as well for the number of corresponding banking relationships that institutions had. We also got a feel for how those relationships were shifting, because it is more than just about losing the access. It is really the tightening up of those relationships in many respects. And even at the central bank level, you will see those relationships being tightened up in terms of frequency, even on an annual basis, on which we have to update the information which the corresponding banks rely on. We updated our survey in 2016. The only thing that's more revealing then is that you could draw a conclusion to say that at least about a quarter of your financial institutions are impacted on some level or the other. And again, please take that a quarter and in a general sense, because when you drill down to your indigenous banks, they're all impacted in some form or the other. They've all had to make shifts and adjustments. And as we learned, the presentation was Somalia. If you're in the money services business, then those impacts are very, very telling. Again, I won't dwell too much in terms of the implication, other than to say that if you are outward facing, international transactions really are what your economy depend upon, and therefore to the extent that those services are disrupted in any way or the other, it really can undermine the efficiency of your economy and basically in some cases, disrupt trade. So that's one of the issues that countries are facing as they grapple with the shifting corresponding banking landscape. So even if you don't want to use the term de-risking, bottom line is the corresponding banking relationship, they're shifting. The other thing that is important to note is that insofar as you have banks that have a business model providing international financial services, again, these shifts are fundamental to their business model, and therefore, in some jurisdictions, you have had financial institutions that have to call it quits because they couldn't really have viable access to the international settlement system. What are we doing in terms of the responses? This is a short list. There are many others I think that can fit on this list. But what it is showing you is that at the global basis, standard setting bodies, the multilateral, they're all involved in terms of bringing more definition to these issues, identifying approaches to resolving the problems. At the Caribbean level, there's a regional approach, and in the regional approach, there's also a focus on coordination among the Caribbean central banks to make sure that as central banks, we do as much as we can within the legal scope that we already have to ensure that there is a sort of harmonized approach to strengthening our systems. And added to this list, there are also the enforcement or regulatory agencies in countries such as the United States that have been extremely constructive and engaged in terms of tackling the issues, helping in building capacity within our countries, and improving our system, as well as providing the important guidance to the banking community in terms of the quote-unquote risk-based approach that they should be taking in dealing with and managing the corresponding relationship. that has been very important. I think what we're all waiting on now is seeing exactly how the correspondent banks respond. I think there's probably still a wait and see, because again, from our earlier presentation, you understand the difficulties in terms of the punitive nature of sanctions that sometimes come across when they are in practice. And I think, so to some extent, there is still a wait and see in terms of trying to understand, how serious are the regulators in saying, well, be risk-based in your approach. What's going to happen the first time I slip up? And not knowing that, I feel as if that's partly the reason why you haven't seen the providers respond as enthusiastically yet. But I think we continue to work on it. In terms of the responses, we can't spend too much time, just lamenting the unfairness or the unevenness of the system. We need now to get to work on solutions as well. Some of the solutions really are strengthening the regulatory systems in all of the areas that are necessary, and a part of that is the information flow needs of correspondent banks, respondent banks, and making sure that there are no legal restrictions on the flow of information throughout the system. But at the same time, what we're saying is that we don't want to continue to rest in a state of vulnerability. So a big part of what we need to do from the intervention side is making our economies and financial system more resilient to shifts in the international system. So it's really, again, in terms of visibility, strengthening those AML and counterterrorism financing systems. Our goal is to have our risk profile, whether it's perceived or actual, reduced through the interventions that we make. And then, as I said, being more resilient. So part of that is really drawing out the fact that, we do think that good regulations and transparency matter. And so in all of the various dimensions that can be done, we will do it. Since we participate and we subject ourselves to the assessment against finance standards. In the case of the Bahamas, we've just completed one of those assessments using the regional peer group. We use those to benchmark the areas in which the system will improve. We also focus on the consultation and the guidance that needs to be improved and disseminated to industry. We focus on bringing more of the financial services activities under regulated supervision, whether in the case of the Bahamas it's the central bank or some other regulatory agency. That's very important, because then you can provide more assurances to the global community in terms of your handle of the problem. In the central bank, what that translates into, on one hand, is that we are right now in the midst of transitioning to a continuous regime of supervision of AML and CFT compliance. We're also looking at introducing financial sanctioning regimes where we encounter deficiencies and lapse in AML systems. One of the areas too is strengthening the payment system from the regulatory standpoint, because as a goal within the Caribbean, when you look at financial inclusion and all of the other areas, reducing the vulnerability means that we need our economies to become less reliant on cash, and there are multiple approaches to that. But part of it is having the right regulatory system. It's not from the intrusive point of view, but making sure that where it can facilitate the sort of innovation that we'll hear about later today, that the system is oriented towards that. Also making certain that insofar as you have the enforcement agencies such as Financial Intelligence Unit, I think in the US it might be FinCEN or something like that, making sure that the quality of the information that they're getting on monitoring of transactions and reporting of suspicious transactions, that you improve those systems. So those are all ways that we're working to make our system stronger insofar as the compliance side is concerned. And communication is important around the quality and clarity of guidance. A lot of this discussion, unfortunately, is probably happening within a closed group of central bankers, regulators, I mean the bankers to some extent, the finance and the others. But we need to make certain that the wider stakeholder community is also aware of the discussion and therefore acting in ways that support the solution that we're targeting. In terms of the payment system, we now have new regulations in place to facilitate non-bank players getting into the game in terms of providing a lot of the electronic payment solution. I wouldn't say necessarily blockchain, because it goes beyond just blockchain, but it's basically digital finance in whatever form you want to define it. For us, financial inclusion is critical. First of all, a lot of what's happening now undermines financial inclusion, but there are also some strategic interventions in the area of financial inclusion in terms of bringing more of the transactions into the regulated and monitored sectors of the economy that will help us from the AML standpoint. The other thing from our point of view, so we've done what we call a national risk assessment exercise, and this sort of pulls together all of the finance assessment. And what the national risk assessment does is it identifies how you strategically will improve your risk monitoring and your preventive systems around criminal abuse. And that is a very important part of the work that we're doing in this space. And the National Risk Assessment draws up the fact that all of your actors, whether the central bank, the Attorney General, or the Criminal Justice Department, your police, your border enforcement, all of those agencies, they have some specified role to play in protecting the system against abuses. And so all of these agencies are working collectively. And in countries like the Bahamas, central banks are very important in that process because they tend to be some of the more resource agencies of the government, and therefore, to the extent that you're visible and at the forefront of these efforts, you can help drive the changes that are needed to improve your system. In the Caribbean, again, the interventions are built around the FADF and other systems. The Financial Stability Board has an action plan, or a suggested action plan in terms of how you deal with the issues. It addresses information, it addresses capacity building with the regulators, it addresses awareness and outreach to stakeholders. So all of those are elements of the Caribbean-wide approach to making certain that we address the regional issues that feed into the profile. And there are also some areas in the regional space where we're looking at addressing some strengthening of regional payment system mechanisms that will help deal with vulnerability issues, but as well addressing the scale issues when you have very small banks having to strengthen compliance system and have to operate on the same level as banks in the G7 or G8 countries where you're spending billions of dollars a year, tens of billions of dollars a year in the technology space, and that's something that these institutions are up against. So we're looking at how, from a regulatory standpoint, there can be as much facilitation as possible in ways where they want to share, have shared systems in the compliance space. So it's very important for us. So, but the point that I would make in wrapping up is that, this is really about trying to manage and reduce the threats, recognizing that there's probably never going to be a fixed target, so there's continuous improvement in our AML and CFT systems and standards that we have to target, that the regulators have a role to play in terms of the guidance, note, and the clarity, and regulators in the sense means not just regulators within the national borders, but also those that are cooperating across the border, because it is a global issue that has to be dealt with. And just as a side note, why I say this, so each of you are probably more familiar with issues regarding customer identification and transactions monitoring in the case of Twitter and Facebook. Most Americans know about it because of all of the political dialogue. That is exactly what these countries are facing in the financial services sphere. Unfortunately, it is so concentrated in smaller countries of less global economic importance. But it's the same issue. Same way you're now trying to hold Twitter and Facebook accountable for monitoring who's operating on their platform. That is what is happening with those indigenous institutions and others. And so, the same way Twitter or Facebook may now have to drop or put restrictions on who operates, that's what's happening in the banking sphere. Unfortunately, the consequences are greater than just a public relations or marketing inconvenience. And so, but maybe it would be useful for people to understand and begin to see parallels in terms of what that's happening. And unfortunately, my fear is that that experience might even spill over into the financial services sector and lead to another round of tightening of standards in regard to compliance and customer due diligence. But for us, part of what we need to do in our space is making sure that we leverage our records insofar as quality of our regulations and how we cooperate at the international level, and that we let the right stakeholders know about what we're doing. Financial inclusion, we keep pushing at it, and super important, all the stakeholders have to be involved, not just the banks, standard setting bodies, but also the customers, and to retail that, because they are an important part of the customer due diligence systems that are very, very prominent in terms of the AML CFD systems and the deterrence that we need to have in place. So I will stop there, and I'm sure we'll have a very interesting panel discussion later.
Yes. Thank you, John. Again, we can take questions a bit later, but you do a great assessment of closing the circle on compliance and the national risk assessment. We'll talk about edge of the network stuff later about electronic KYC and identity, which is clearly an issue for many banks in the US. But I'd like to hand over now to Roberta Gardner from the OCC, who's a Senior Deputy Controller for Compliance and Community Affairs Officer of the Controller. Please.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, it's a bit, I've been told it's a bit hot here. I've opened the window because it's some centralized, very old temperature control system, which apparently is done from another building. So I can just open up the window here, then let me know if I'm looking at side.
Okay. So, good morning. Okay, everyone wake up. Good morning. Good morning. So it's really a pleasure to join you and to have this important discussion in an academic setting. And I'm happy to be here to share a different point of view. As you've all heard, there are lots of references to government activities and that of agencies of various countries. And I'm happy to share with you the efforts of the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, or the OCC, to address what is commonly referred to, as you've heard, de-risking. Not a term that I'm particularly fond of, but we'll talk about that in a few minutes. And I'm going to share our observations as a bank supervisor. And after my remarks, I look forward to continuing this conversation and being part of this distinguished panel. Perhaps, and before I discuss our recent efforts, I know that not everyone may be familiar with the OCC, and it might be useful to understand who we are and what we do. The OCC was founded in 1863 to administer a system of national banks that would provide credit and savings consistently across the nation and help meet the country's business and finance needs. Today, the federal banking system includes almost 1,400 national banks, federal savings associations, federal branches of foreign banks and supervised third-party service providers that meet the banking and finance needs of consumers, businesses, and communities across the United States. The banks and federal savings associations under OCC supervision hold $11.6 trillion in assets, representing 68% of total U.S. banking assets. Some of the banks that the OCC supervises are the largest, most internationally active banks in the country. Because the federal banking system meets a wide range of needs, from those of families and local businesses to the cross-border financial services demands of international corporations, the system is a prime target for drug traffickers, hackers, terrorists, and other types of criminals. As such, the system is subject to significant exposure to potential money laundering and other illicit activity, including terrorist financing and identity theft. Protecting the integrity of the national financial system from these types of criminal abuses, while at the same time making sure that banks continue to meet the needs of customers, businesses, and communities they serve, is a critical part of our work as a regulator. Over a year ago, the OCC took measures to enhance the agency's focus on compliance issues, including Bank Secrecy Act and anti-money laundering compliance, by creating an executive-level unit dedicated to this important part of the OCC's mission. That department, which is named Compliance and Community Affairs, and I have the opportunity to lead, allows us to leverage agency resources to provide consistent and effective policy guidance and supervision to promote safe and sound operations of our supervised financial institutions. In addition to BSA/AML, our concentration is on fair access and fair treatment for consumers, compliance with consumer protection laws and regulations, and responsible community reinvestment. Now, for our discussion here today, I want to provide some specific examples of how the OCC has analyzed and addressed de-risking in the context of risk reevaluation, my preferred phrase. The process in which banks evaluate the BSA/AML risk posed by their customer relationships, including risk posed by the activities of foreign correspondent banks. These risk reevaluations sometimes lead to banks terminating relationships. But in 2015, the OCC took a careful look at the drivers of such account terminations, including through the lens of our agency's commitment to fair access and fair treatment of customers. We wanted to take a closer look into data that were indicating that routine bank risk reevaluations had in fact resulted in terminations of relationships, including correspondent banking relationships. Our review of this issue found that there can be many drivers of these decisions to terminate relationships, but the decisions were generally based on two concerns. First, there were doubts about the host country's ability to supervise for AML compliance. And second, the financial benefits of the relationship were sometimes believed not to offset the cost of managing the AML compliance risk associated with that relationship. These are legitimate risk management and business concerns. But as you know, decisions to terminate banking relationships can have regrettable consequences. Long-standing relationships may be disrupted. Transactions that would have taken place legally and transparently may be driven underground. Customers whose banking relationships are terminated and who cannot make alternative banking arrangements elsewhere may effectively be cut off from the regulated financial system altogether. And there have been many instances of real human hardship that results when customers find themselves unable to transfer funds to family members in other countries. Such stories remind us just how profoundly banking can affect people's lives. And we've heard about that from everyone who preceded me today. The OCC does not generally direct the financial institutions we supervise to either maintain or sever account relationships. The decision to exit a line of business or terminate a banking relationship with a customer resides solely with the bank and not with us. Financial institutions must make their own choices about whether to enter into or maintain a business relationship based on their own particular business objectives, their own evaluation of the risk associated with particular products or services, and their own capacity to effectively manage those risks. The year we spent reviewing how banks conduct risk reevaluations was an extremely productive one. We looked at how the financial institutions we supervise develop and implement policies and procedures for evaluating customer risk as part of their BSA/AML compliance programs, and for making risk-based determinations to close customer accounts. Our goal was to identify current practices and possible gaps in existing policies and procedures for conducting periodic client risk reevaluations, for making these decisions on whether to retain or terminate an account. Through our supervisory process, we looked at whether banks had explicit policies for risk reevaluation and who was involved in making decisions regarding the possible termination of relationships. We looked at whether banks use oversight committees to review these decisions, whether the decisions were reported to the boards of directors or senior managers, and whether the respondents had the opportunity to address any concerns that had been identified before a relationship was terminated. The results of our review were published in October 2016 in our Risk Management Guidance on Periodic Risk Reevaluation of Foreign Correspondent Banking. This guidance reiterates the OCC's supervisory expectation that in addition to having established policies and procedures for conducting risk assessments for foreign correspondent accounts, banks should periodically evaluate and reassess this risk as part of their ongoing risk management and due diligence practices. It also describes corporate governance best practices for banks' consideration when conducting these periodic evaluations of risk and making account retention or termination decisions about foreign correspondent accounts. We encouraged and saw in these best practices that banks do need to have a governance structure. These decisions need to be made at high levels of the organization. There needs to be a deeper understanding of what that decision will have on the respondent countries. And if there is, as I think Abraham said, the decision that you may be the last man standing, then that has to be evaluated as well. In August 2016, we also worked with the other federal banking agencies and the U.S. Department of the Treasury to issue the joint fact sheet on foreign correspondent banking. This fact sheet summarized key aspects of federal supervisory and enforcement strategy and practices in the area of correspondent banking. The Treasury Department and the banking agencies communicate their expectations that respondent banks and national authorities in other jurisdictions have found our guidance valuable in understanding the supervisory framework within which our financial institutions offer correspondent banking services. These two pieces of guidance, the fact sheet and the OCC's guidance, I viewed as being complementary. And the responses that we've heard from our institutions, as well as some of the countries who are seeing their relationships being reestablished, is welcome news. But there is more to be done, and there are certainly more results that we are waiting to see. Our efforts do not stop at the U.S. border. The OCC is also involved with international agencies that study, organize, and implement anti-money laundering practices for banks and the closely related issue of preventing terrorist financing. We are a member of the U.S. delegation to the Financial Action Task Force, or FATF, as you've heard them referred to today. And they are the international body that sets the standards for combating money laundering, the financing of terrorism, and other related threats to the integrity of the international financial system. The FATF Board recommendations provide consistent and coordinated responses to these threats. The United States just completed its FATF mutual evaluation in 2016. And I know that several of you here today have either already been through this process or will go through this process in the near future. Governor Roll just mentioned that his Caribbean had gone through the task force with the Bahamas, so I'm sure you share our recent experience in going through this. I believe that Barbados will soon have the mutual evaluation experience as well. We also participate on the Financial Stability Board's Correspondent Banking Coordination Group, which has made a number of recommendations to the G20 on de-risking and financial inclusion. And we also participate in the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, which in June 2017 published its revised guidelines for sound management of risk related to money laundering and financing of terrorism. In October 2016, the FATF published its guidance on correspondent banking services, which was a welcome and important step in clarifying regulatory expectations and the application of the standards with respect to Recommendation 13, which addresses correspondent banking. The guidance addressed central topics such as the relationship between customer due diligence and correspondent banking, information verification, and risk management, including ongoing customer due diligence and transaction monitoring. The FATF publication also provided guidance to financial institutions with customers who are money or value transfer service, or MVTS providers. The FATF correspondent banking guidance built on the MVTS guidance for a risk-based approach, published by FATF in February 2016. The guidance places emphasis on understanding and monitoring risk and on strong and effective supervision of the sector. It also addresses risk assessments that allow MVTS providers to design and implement controls commensurate with their own identified risk, allocating compliance resources appropriately to areas of higher risk. The risk-based approach also allows supervisors to focus their own resources under Recommendation 26, which addresses supervision, on higher risk areas. Furthermore, the risk-based approach acknowledges that there are variations in levels of risk within the MVTS sector, which financial institutions could and should take into account in considering providing banking services to MVTS customers. Our OCC risk reevaluation guidance is in line with this FATF guidance. Similarly, our OCC 2014 Statement on Risk Management with respect to banking money service businesses, or MSBs, parallels the FATF MVTS guidance as well. That statement also notes that MSBs present varying degrees of risk to a financial institution, and not all MSBs should be considered high risk. Therefore, the activities we have undertaken domestically and internationally are, and continue to be, consistent with international standards related to the provision of correspondent banking services to respondent banks and other jurisdictions and to MVTS providers. In wrapping up, I would like to share 3 observations which relate to correspondent banking as well as MVTS customers. The first is with regard to risk assessments. Risk assessments allow countries, financial institutions, and MVTS providers to understand and identify money laundering and terrorist financing risks present in the jurisdiction, as well as within the individual financial institutions. The design and implementation of strong controls are based on a sound risk assessment. Conducting risk assessments is a supervisory expectation of the OCC, and it is one that we share with the FATA and BCBS guidance stating that complete and comprehensive risk assessments are necessary for effective risk management. Second, in the United States, ongoing customer due diligence is established as a regulatory requirement in a rule that becomes effective in May 2018. It is a requirement under FATA Recommendation 10 and the BCBS guidance. The MVTS guidance and foreign correspondent guidance issued by the FATA discuss the importance of conducting sound customer due diligence and having access to sufficient information to perform effective transaction and suspicious activity monitoring. Access to timely, complete, updated, and accurate information is fundamental to a foreign correspondent bank's effective management of risks associated with the respondent bank customers. This type of information supports the correspondent bank's effective transaction and suspicious activity monitoring required by regulation. My third point focuses on supervision, as reflected in FATA Recommendation 20 and IO3. These international standards apply to the banking as well as the MVTS sector. As the OCC has said in the past, country practices do matter. Strong supervisory frameworks and AML regimes provide a greater degree of confidence to OCC supervised banks in retaining respondent bank relationships. They may also inspire them to establish new relationships. Similar considerations may also be applied to MVTS providers. And likewise, respondent banks and MVTS providers may also have expectations for a transparent, effective, and comprehensive supervisory regime in the United States, which is exactly what the OCC is continually working to achieve. I want to close today by stressing that although we are located in different jurisdictions, we share similar goals of promoting and ensuring access to financial services for all consumer categories. The objectives that we have established for ourselves in each of our jurisdictions are reflected in our adoption and implementation of the international standards, whether they are the FATA recommendations or the Basel IV principles or the recommendations from the FSB. Our continued recognition of what we share, rather than what makes us different, is the key to our success in addressing de-risking impacts on correspondent banking and remittance transfers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think your cooperative and inclusive comments will be music to the ears of many people in this room. So with that, I think we're going to break for coffee, full coffee break, and then come back here at
But it's pretty super interesting and it's accessible for people like me. Yeah.
It's amazing I remember everybody's name. Okay, once more than
somebody dropped a Metro North 10-trip card. If you can identify yourself, you get it. Otherwise, we will auction it off. It has a value of $66.
Yeah, but it's partially used, so it's been deprecated a bit.
So, anybody lost it? Anybody wants to claim?
Okay, well, we'll cut it up in blocks and we'll use it. Okay, so welcome back from coffee. Want to introduce my wisdom? Please. Well, Mohammed is coming up. I want to introduce Dr. Margaret Miller, friend from the World Bank. Especially, thank you so much, Margaret, for coming up. Margaret is the lead financial economist and global lead responsible for financial access at the World Bank. Very much embedded in the financial inclusion world and also looking at de-risking so far as it affects financial inclusion. So, while you all think about questions for the panel, I want to give Margaret a moment to tell us about what you've done.
Thank you, Leon, for the invitation today. So I first want to, and thank you for Columbia University for putting this on, and we're very pleased that there are so many important academic institutions looking increasingly at not just financial inclusion, but digital finance. So I want to give a little bit of a statement that I'm more of a generalist on this topic. So I'm the global lead for responsible financial access at the bank. And in that capacity, the issues that I look at are national financial inclusion strategies, consumer protection, and financial literacy. I'm doing quite a lot right now on gender. We're in the process of finalizing our gender strategy for financial sector development issues across not just financial inclusion, but across long-term investment, women's entrepreneurship, a number of issues. And have also more recently become involved in fintech. I have colleagues who are deeper in remittances and in AML, CFT, and KYC issues. But my role is one that's kind of transversal, and because of the importance of this topic for so many countries in terms of access to finance, I'm increasingly have been pulled into it. So when Leon and I met a few months ago at an event in Egypt, this topic came up, and I'm very glad to be able to be here today. So maybe I just want to step back a moment and say, that to be in the topic of financial inclusion today, I think is really exciting. I've been working around this topic for a long time, and when you go back even a decade, there were a lot of populations that you just, even if theoretically you could say, well, microfinance or different kinds of opportunities could theoretically reach remote and very low-income populations, they really weren't doing it practically, and I think scaling up some of those old approaches, there was never we never got there, and the envelope didn't get pushed nearly as far as we wanted. In the last 10 years, because of the rise of the ubiquitous cell phone, it's really possible to reach almost, we think, everybody, all adults with financial services. And so we have something called Universal Financial Access 2020, which is a corporate goal of the World Bank Group, and we have many, many partners on this. And the objective is to create access to at least a transaction or basic financial account by the year 2020. And probably many of you in the room here are familiar with our global index data. Those data are demand-side data of more than 140, collecting more than 140 countries every 3 years. We actually are in the field still with the last of the country collection efforts. But we think that, we're making solid progress worldwide on this objective, but there's still more to do. And in the context of just I mentioned of gender, which hasn't come up really today, but I'd be curious about that aspect in our discussion. Kind of some of our early data seem to indicate that women continue to be one of the gaps that need to be covered, as well as the rural and more remote and agricultural communities, which isn't a surprise. Thinking of this topic and of the link between the issues of risk and whether those are risks related to AML CFT or the risk about making poor credit analysis decisions. In particular, about 10 years ago, at the time of the financial crisis, the World Bank and other multilaterals and other stakeholders, were very concerned that the response to that event would be, let's pull back, pull back on anything that seems risky, and a lot of times, of course, emerging markets where there's not nearly as much transparency seem right in the center of that target. And so there has been a very, let's say, thoughtful effort to make sure that the international community is looking at how to keep people included. And the universal financial access goal is important because we see it as part of growth. And this has been one very nice thing about being part of such a distinguished panel is that I feel like a lot of the points that if I would have made a PowerPoint or a formal presentation have already been raised. But we really see it as part of both growth and poverty reduction. And as I think everyone here, stated, it's also part of maintaining an appropriate risk approach in terms of, reducing risk. Because how we see this topic of financial inclusion and de-risking or risk reevaluation, or what's the term you're using? Refusal to serve, is that most individuals, most firms are not involved in nefarious activity. And as you push especially the very low value transactions, and here we talk about tiered KYC and proportional levels of regulatory responses, you push small value transactions out of the formal system, then they start to claw that informal system. And as if you're trying to see what's happening, that in terms of things like terrorism or different kinds of illegal activities or illicit criminal activities, it just becomes that much harder for the authorities to see the bad actors if you push the good actors into that same group. And so for us, it's about the positive aspects, but it's also about making sure that in terms of the risk response, it can be an effective one. So I just want to highlight a couple of points, and then I'll stop, from a recent study that colleagues of mine in the SME Finance Forum at the IFC put out. And they were looking at the issue of correspondent banking relationships, leveraging on the banks that are IFC clients, and did a survey, and about 300 banks responded. And a couple of the key points here that I wanted to raise in terms of maybe areas to go into for our discussion today. The importance of regulation. We've heard here comments about tiered and proportional regulation, development of capacity in the regulatory community, and harmonization. And in fact, I'm involved in some of the G20 Global Partnership for Financial Inclusion activities, and increasingly we're looking also at how can cross-border sharing of some of this kind of information around, for example, digital onboarding take place. Then there's the financing aspect, and multilateral organizations and organizations like the IFC are there to be providing support, looking at things like how can you help to mitigate risk through appropriate financial instruments, support for foreign correspondent banks that are maintaining activities in different higher risk jurisdictions, and looking at products that could be useful. Somebody I think mentioned the importance of innovation amongst the multilaterals and finding different and the global community and finding new ways to address this problem. And so we're certainly interested in that. We have a blockchain lab at the World Bank that's not only for finance, but for looking at the role that blockchain can play in development across a number of sectors, where I think that maybe it's not a solution for today or tomorrow, but things change so quickly. Maybe it's a year or 2 or 5 from now, but we're certainly looking at how that could play a role. We think that capacity building is critical in terms of helping the banks, helping customers with this, and understanding. One of the topics I've worked on a lot in the past is financial education, financial literacy, so helping consumers themselves know how to become more transparent, and capacity building for the regulators. And while the national risk assessments are undertaken by the national authorities, the World Bank often provides support to the national authorities to be able to carry those out. And technical innovation, we talked about a little bit, centralizing some of these data, like I mentioned, digital onboarding. In this context, recently someone said that up to 80% of new client acquisition costs are about that onboarding. So if you have a situation where one institution has, has done a good job of onboarding and you're using consistent methodologies, could that due diligence be shared then in a more effective way, both in the regulatory community with other partners, whether in the same jurisdiction or internationally, if they're transacting internationally. We have a program called ID for Development, or ID for D, the World Bank, which is another cross-cutting initiative. A lot of the activities in ID for D have to do with facilitating payments, because you need ID to know where your students are and how, maybe if there's a conditional cash transfer, or if you want to pay teachers, it's important for health benefits. And of course, course, ID just in terms of, opening that first account. So we're really working on looking at ways to strengthen national ID systems and how to make some of this information more readily available when necessary globally, but also working on how do we deal with all of this data, the growth of data, and looking at data protection and privacy concerns as well. And finally, knowledge sharing. I think this kind of event is really important for the opportunity is for sharing information. We see one of our critical roles as being part of that global community and also being active and engaged with policymakers at the national and regional level. So I think that that's something where the DFSO and similar kinds of groups on academic campuses, as trusted third-party producers of insights, data, information, can play a really critical role. And we're looking forward to being more engaged with you and with all of you in the room as we go forward, because we really see this as critical to the financial inclusion agenda, and the financial inclusion agenda really being critical to our broader objectives of economic growth and poverty reduction. So very happy to be part of this distinguished group.
Thank you, I've spoken enough. I want to open up the floor to questions. As I said, we have all the questions for each of the speakers. Hugo, you can just identify who you are, maybe contextually. We know you, Hugo.
Margaret, we helped Carlos Corazza from the World Bank to do this survey on the risking, and we tried to get all the money, a lot of money transmitters around the world to get the data, so we could move it from just an anecdotal to really, and it was very hard. We were not very successful. It was very hard to convince money transmitters to share that information. They felt that and this is happening in the whole industry, if the money transmitter comes out and says, I lost this bank account, he fears that maybe the other bank will hear, and then it will be terminated by this bank, and it's like a snowball effect. So it's been very, very hard to collect that information. But that was a good effort, I think, and because the World Bank initiated that, and we were able to move by this time to make second, because that was 2 years.
That was the 2015 surveys.
The second thing is, and there was a huge microfinance institution in Mexico called Desarrollo. They've been complaining about the risking for the last year and a half. Claudia Revilla, the director, has been very, very vocal. There's 7 million women, and they cannot get back accounts. And all the regulators in Mexico know the situation. They've been through, but they just cannot force the banks. And this is not the risking because of compliance situation, is because of microfinance, payments of $10, $5, all this women crowding the bank branches, it's another thing. So she yells monopoly and all things. But from gender perspective, I think I'll try to reach that information to you. But it's not only, sometimes we focus in the compliance because money transfer industry and compliance issues. No, this is a social issue of banks not wanting to have that clientele. Those two things.
Thank you.
So if I could just on that would I really appreciate your feedback on the 2015 survey. We may want to do another one. We've recently done some case studies in 8 countries. I don't know if that's going to be published separately, but they were trying to determine if they could find a specific in those 8 countries, and there's only one of those is in Africa, South Africa, Tonga and Samoa in the Philippines, in Asia, Mexico and Jamaica and Guatemala and Bangladesh and Bangladesh and South Asia. And they didn't find direct evidence of a link between remittance and de-risking, but they found a lot of, in terms of saying, it's increasing price, etc. But you know, there's a lot of individual instances, obviously, and it's getting to be more concentrated relationships, and there are a lot of concerns about how obviously the direction that things are going. And then on the Pro Desarrollo, this is the importance, I think, of the competition aspect, because it can be difficult for traditional types of banks to operate with these very small amounts, but if you go to different kinds of business models, can find a lot of value in working with small value transactions and payments. I think you weren't referring probably to something. It was most like a domestic issue. And so that's where we really are looking very actively in the fintech space, and how can we help the financial sector, or what role can we play in the transformation of the financial sector, which we definitely think we're in the middle of a massive transformation.
That microfinance institution doesn't want to get into remittances, and is holding off their remittance project, which so the solution was there because they said, if domestically we have problems, if we get into remittances, this is going to blow up the problem of oceans. That's where the link is.
Any other questions so far?
David True.
Oh, I'm on deck? I'm David True. I've been in payments for more years than I want to admit. And I want to appreciate Leon's inviting me to this, because recently I've had some projects that involve cross-border remittances. And so I'm quite fascinated listening to everyone talk, from Governor Roll to... There was a notion that... so you spoke of doing things within your country to increase the... I guess the integrity, or the sense that they're... the strength of whatever's going on within the country. But my question is, when you go cross-border, and a lot of the remittances originate in the U.S., you have to deal with multiple entities inside the U.S. as well as those probably in the destination country. How effective is cooperation between the multiple entities, so that if you get certification or approval in one entity, it helps with something else?
When you say entity, you mean
Safe harbor.
Sorry? Yeah, effectively. You mentioned that a lot of the Caribbean, you might fall under a regional designation of a high-risk area, and that would impede or create encumbrances on some of the remittances from migrant workers, for example. So what efforts are going on to coordinate that, to say, hi, in my country we've done these three things, thus you should relax any scrutiny or make it easier for people to remit to my country? What sort of things are going on in that sphere? Because that's the very practical level that makes the bankers say yes or no.
John,
well, part of the approach in the Caribbean is to recognize that one of the low-hanging fruits is for the central banks to coordinate as much as possible their efforts, because if there are political solutions, then you're bringing legislative reform into the picture. You can continue to target those, but in the interim, some of the simple solutions are in terms of the regulatory guidance, to make sure that they're harmonized as much as possible across countries, so that it can be clear that the supervisory regime within the countries are somewhat similar in terms of their approaches. One of the challenges, though, which I think you may be getting at, is what's happening outside the region. And we know that in the case of the money transmission businesses, in the U.S., for example, that they don't necessarily fall under the same regulators as the banks or the federal regulators. So to the extent that we're having some of this dialogue with the federal regulators in the U.S., we also have to be concerned about financial institutions that will be providing services to us that may be regulated at the state or some other level. And so I think that is an area where some closure might be needed, and it may also speak to why, in the case of money transmission, it's been more difficult to arrest some of the challenges.
Yeah, I think we may have some conversation about that later in the evening, since I know that a little bit, having gone through with a client the acquisition of money transmitter license, and seeing there is there's a reasonable degree of coordination amongst the states, but nonetheless, it's a state-by-state effort. But I'm wondering, you talked about regularizing or having the central banks kind of coordinate their efforts, kind of coordinate the standards to which they apply. Who's responsible for that? Is it just a matter of raising that issue on each of those banks' to-do list so that they will make that coordination? Is there a body that's trying to coordinate that?
No, we have a committee of central bank governors.
Yeah.
So we meet at least twice yearly, and among the supervisors in each of the central banks, there are working groups that are given mandates in terms of looking at how we're addressing these issues, and even the work that is done in terms of the KPI evaluation, which extends beyond the central bank, but looks at the countries individually. It also opens up some opportunities for collaboration. So in that space, you have the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force.
Yes.
And they drive a lot of the country-by-country evaluations against the global FATF assessments. And so they are a very valuable resource for us, also in identifying the low-hanging fruits that we need to address in terms of raising the standards across the jurisdiction. But in the first instance, we all issue regulatory guidance notes, and central bank legislation, for the most part in our region, modernize to the point where central banks can also issue regulations directly. So that cuts through some of the red tape in terms of the speed at which regulations can evolve to reflect the global state of play. And so we're trying to take advantage of that, even as we nudge the political directive to move ahead.
Mm-hmm.
That's a more ambitious goal.
I thought you might have a comment.
Yeah, I just want to make two comments very quickly. One is the good old days before this came. It was on Australia, there was, and still is, post-track, that monitors all monies that the remittance companies collect and to whom they send it. So we came up with another solution that says, well, what if we have some track from Somalia where we close the loop? So if X sends money to Y, you know who X is in that velocity, and I can tell you who Y is in Mogadishu. That idea is still working. The Australian government is slow, but I think that will happen.
That's what they've done in New Zealand.
Yeah, but the other option was then, instead of moving that forward, instead we bring up the risking, which then upset everything. And what it does is basically now, we don't even know who's sending money. Now, the reason I was suspecting the data was before you had a set data that you can rely on, because you knew from the banks how much money was sent by whom. Now, we don't anymore. And this is the risk I was trying to highlight. In other words, it's so obvious to me and anyone who thinks clearly that the system is broken. It's not working. But for some reason, nobody's paying attention. The other option is, so the other comment I want to make is, there are other solutions that have worked. For example, from the UK, there was the corridors between UK and Pakistan, where the money was sent to the central bank, and another bank, because the central bank didn't have all the reserves, that they would give to those remittance companies. Perfect. So, huge problem. Why can't that be replicated? So this was the comment I was making about the World Bank, where we need someone who's in the middle who can say, look, this problem was solved here. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. Just use the same thing. It works. It's not happening. It's damn frustrating because when you can see the issue and people just are waiting. God forbid, but I'll tell you my biggest worry. I'm from Malaysia, and the reason I'm worried about this, every week or every second week, some of my folks in the US or Europe, they send money.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm thinking.
By plane. Now, if 1 million or 2 million of that money is lost, that's a huge impact on somebody can only count on that. It's a lot of money lost. And it's a disaster waiting to happen. We can highlight that anymore.
So what is the blockage then? The idea that you described sounds like a very good one, where one central bank and the other, and then I guess the responsibility for vetting the distribution of it goes for the destination market central bank. What's holding that up? You said you don't know why no one's looking at it. What is your guess as to why?
Well, I'll be very frank with you, and I've been on the other side as well.
Please.
Governments are, by nature, basically slow. But we just have to keep pushing. So we all have the representatives in Parliament or in the Congress or whatever, we have to keep highlighting. We just can't stop. We just have to keep pushing until someone hears it. And here again, with the universities, clarity is needed. People don't even understand what the problem is. So someone can come up in a better way than I'm saying it and say, look, this is the problem. Why can't you do something about this? Let me just take one more minute. I walked in this country yesterday and I went to a chemist. So the reason I'm using this example is the clarity needed. I said, I'm asthmatic, I just want to buy this drug. The guy says, no, you need a prescription. I said, how do I do it? Oh, go to Broadway, number, blah, blah, blah. I went there. The lady says, join the queue, and it's $120. I said, no problem. I'm getting the information I want. So I'm waiting, and then say, no, by the way, the doctor might not actually write a prescription after all that. I said, okay, well, thank you very much. I walk out. Why? Because I got the information I wanted. I know where I stand. I don't get that from the bank. The bank just tells me, you can't have that card. Why? I don't know.
In particular to Governor Wolf, how do you think will this discussion be affected by things like the Paradise Papers and the Panama Papers and other discussions about the use of some countries in the Caribbean as a way to avoid tax payments in Europe and the United States? It certainly does not help the public perception that we should do something to help, because it seems like there is no symmetry here on the help. Is that the correct assessment? And if so, I hope it's not.
Well, I think the unfortunate part around the fixation with the offshore financial services sector is that there isn't sufficient appreciation that that sector of activity does not overlap with the domestic financial system in countries that use that business model. So we do have the unfortunate spillover where the jurisdiction gets placed in a certain risk category. It could be a spillover from one set of activities that has no relationship with the others. But I think to some extent, what I find most useful about the revelation of the Paradise Papers is the frequent qualifications that journalists have been making, which I think is good, which is having, and I would not use this word normally, but having an offshore financial relationship is not in and of itself illegal. And that's very important. A great concern now is that some of what were the secrecy benefits of offshore finance is now being migrated to the United States, and that the United States now is fast becoming one of the leading offshore financial centers in all of the respects that are concerned as regards tax compliance. But for Paradise Papers, I think what is important to recognize is that the United States has FATCA, and the United States has achieved more in respect to FATCA than the OECD has yet in terms of its common reporting standards on tax cooperation. The OECD's common reporting standards around the sharing of information in tax matters is also taking hold, and all of these countries are participants in those forums and have the information systems and the like to report to all of the interested counterparty countries that need information on tax. And I'd say, from Bahamas' point of view, we started to see an unintended or an unexpected, I call it almost benefit, in the sense that this information was being one way. We don't have an income tax system, but we have other taxes, so the interest in knowing what wealth nationals have abroad is not as great a concern. However, because of the FATCA and the OECD's more general initiative, which is basically a globalization of FATCA, our nationals are starting to come back and say, oh, by the way, my financial services provider in the other country has suddenly realized that you have regulations that I should be compliant with. Therefore, now how are you going to help me become compliant? So we're now noticing that our citizens are now coming to us be regularized in terms of their assets abroad. There's no tax benefit there for us, but it is an example of a benefit for us. But it also illustrates that the secrecy elements are disappearing. I don't think there's any concern about that. The secrecy in terms of tax compliance, we've all accepted that that's a thing of the past. And these jurisdictions, I would expect, will continue to cooperate and to share information as necessary. But so the Paradise Papers, from that point of view, I think it just reinforces the direction we're headed in. And we just have to continue to demonstrate that the tax authorities are receiving the information.
Yeah, hi, I'm Joel Patton. I'm a consultant with various financial services and fintech companies, mostly in emerging markets. I have a question for Mr. Gardner. You mentioned that banks are totally within their rights to make whatever decisions on whether or not to provide a bank account to a given business. Has your office thought of providing targets outside of the independence that the banks might have on an individual decision, but collectively, if you look at all the MSB accounts across the country, and if your office wanted to see that number be stable or grow, could you set targets in some way to the industry to say, okay, on an individual decision, you're your own entity, but collectively, we want to see the numbers of MSB accounts rise, and to provide some sort of stick to the industry to get them to be a little more reasonable, particularly smaller and more innovative companies that don't have the balance sheet that's particularly attractive to a bank.
So I think that, I don't know if you're familiar with the 2005 interagency guidance that the federal banking agencies and the U.S. Treasury Advancement put out with regard to money services businesses.
I have it on my refrigerator, right?
Okay, yeah. So you have that one. So do you also have posted right beside it the 2014 statement that I issued that said the 2005 guidance is still good?
I will by tonight.
Okay. So my concern, I guess, if we set targets and trying to do something other than provide the guidance that continuously say you cannot just paint the MSB industry with a broad brush, that there are varying degrees of risk, and you can't just take a whole category of businesses and take them out of the system. If we set targets and we try to go about providing that as the incentive for banks to get more or to provide more financial services to MSBs, then do we have, again, another unintended consequence of inadvertently saying that there are some that will be acceptable, and then creating perhaps further de-risking for a lower portion of the MSB population. Because if you just say targets and you say get this percentage in, then there is a tendency, I think, for the banks to look across the spectrum and see who's making who. And then you begin to see a cluster of certain types of MSBs that would be considered the winners, that would be the safe zone. And I don't think that the U.S. government should be in that position. What we should do is to continue to provide the type of guidance that says, look at this, and when we come in and we do our exams of you, we want to make sure that you've done good due diligence. And you look across the spectrum, and we're not seeing you totally do this one sector. When you begin to say, we've had these discussions at the international level as well. So there are certain jurisdictions that would suggest we should have a numbering system, and you should get, or stars, let's say 5 stars to MSBs that are less risky and, decreasing number number of stars as you go up to the higher risk. That is only going to result in a certain part of that population that will always get financial services and a further pullback from other parts. Every bank has to have their own risk appetite. And there are banks who will look at a higher risk MSB, but know that they've got the internal controls and the policies and the ability to manage that risk. What we're trying to help them understand is risk is to be managed, not avoided. And somebody actually had that on their slide. I don't remember if it was Governor Bull or Mr. Abraham, but that is truly the way this should be approached. Not the winners of higher risk or lower risk always gets the accounts and higher risk are excluded. I think that's really what we have to continue to talk about and provide those incentives in that way.
The follow-up question is from what we heard about the smaller banks, state banks especially, is that there's a lot of compliance uncertainty. Because on the one hand, you've got some examiners looking at a risk-based approach, and some of them doing a sort of checkbox approach, which isn't risk-based. So it's that arbitrage, if you will, and lack of coordination, which basically says let's err on the side of caution, because we just don't have the capacity ourselves to figure out what is applicable to us. So de-risk.
So I think that the training that we do at the OCC is really vital to helping examiners understand that it's not incumbent upon them to go in and micromanage the bank.
Yeah.
And the checkbox approach is not where we want to go. So I think, Michael, you had some reference to choke point, I think, in your slides. An initiative that the OCC was never a part of. I always have to say that because we kind of get dragged into that one. But the OCC never published a list of higher risk entities or higher risk types of businesses. Other government agencies went down that road, and it was a disaster to actually have a publication that was provided to examiners that would suggest that certain types of businesses in and of themselves, just because of the business venture, presented higher risk and therefore should somehow be avoided. That's an approach, similar to one of trying to provide numbers is what we're trying to avoid. That the risk management aspect and the training of our examiners to embrace the risk-based approach is really where we get the consistency that we want to see in financial services being provided to MSPs.
One last question from you.
Thank you. It's mostly a comment. A number of regulators across the world and the MSB associations are trying to get the regulators to tell the banks that are licensed by the same regulators as MSBs that when a bank denies a service or closes an account, reports to the regulator. These are the reasons why I deny certain bank account services to this MSBs, and it tells it. It's being discussed. It's being done in certain jurisdictions, and my personal opinion is that it's good. At least the regulator knows the reasons why that bank has decided not to bank, and the regulators can go and look and says, is a compliance issue that we didn't see audits, and I think it's an idea that seems to be growing. I know some regulators, Hong Kong and this and that are moving into that direction. I think it's good. It's just my opinion. What do you think?
So I go back to the general premise that, as a general rule, we do not tell banks who to bank and who not to bank. But one of the things that we found when we did our inventory back in 2015 with regard to activities of terminating accounts by banks that led to the issuance of our risk reevaluation guidance, we actually did see that, there are a number of best practices out there. One of the better practices, I would say, is having decisions to terminate accounts, foreign correspondent accounts in particular, should not be made by a low-level, I shouldn't call it low-level, but a staff-level person in the BSA department. That decision, especially if it's going to withdraw from an entire sector, has to be raised to executive management, but more appropriately to the board of directors, with a full understanding of what that type of decision may result in and what that does to that community that will not be able to provide remittance services or be able to clear U.S. dollars for the United States, if that's an important part of the equation. They also need to understand and be able to provide a meaningful amount of time. If the decision is made that you're going to terminate the relationship, unfortunately, what we've heard is some entities get as little as 6 weeks notice that the relationship is terminated, and you have to come and get the money, or we're going to mail you a check and you have to find another relationship. Those generally are negotiated for longer periods, but why start at 6 weeks if you know that it's going to take 3 to 6 months for an entity to find a new relationship? But more importantly, I would say, even before the relationship is terminated, if the institution has identified concerns, either with the regime and their ability to manage BSA, AML, CFT risk, or there are other concerns that have given rise to moving in that direction, that decision needs to be communicated to the impacted correspondent. They need to understand what it is that's driving that decision, and perhaps even be given an opportunity to address that concern before the relationship is terminated. But if it can't be addressed, time is on the best side of all relationships, especially if one has been long-standing for many years. Yes?
And I think the idea of having the decision at an appropriate level so the benefits and the impacts of ending that relationship can be fully considered. How does one encourage that at a national or from a regulatory level? Because that becomes the difficult part, since running a bank, running an organization like this, a lot of times you have a lot to deal with, and you want to make things simple. So giving checklists and giving these 3 points kill it, talking about what the best practice would be, but how does one promulgate those?
So what we did see this range of practices. So ultimately, we observed some of these practices in the banks that we supervise. But by putting out the guidance that lays out these best practices, and not only did we issue it, we actually held webinars with our institutions that were engaged in correspondent banking. We held specific training for our examiners so that they understood the purpose of the guidance and they were able to talk about it, help bankers understand what some of these structures needed to look like. When you have, I think, one thing I think someone pointed this out earlier is not only is there the issue with regard to the banks that terminate these relationships, there's an impact on the country. There's a reputation risk back on the other side for these banks as well. And for countries who had their relationships terminated in the past couple of years, when you meet them in various settings such as this one, and you had a financial institution that had a relationship with the country, let's say correspondent banking for 30 years, and then all of a sudden they get a letter that says you have 6 weeks to find a new home, and that's it. What you hear from the country is, I don't care what that bank was to me before, I will never bank with them again, and I will tell every country in my sector not to have a relationship with them at all. This is not good global banking, right? So you've got to have structure, policies, procedures that we can communicate through guidance, that our examiners are familiar with, where banks truly understand the range of issues that this impacts to them.
And would the stick be that your examiners know that's a consideration, that's something to review when they do the bank examination? So the bank would say, oh, if we follow these, then that won't be a problem during our examination.
It's not quite that simple.
But I'm thinking of motivation on the bank side, because why should we do this? And there needs to be some sort of, if I do this, then something gets easier for me.
Well, I think really what it is that, once the banks, so many of our financial institutions, I think most of you are aware, went through a period of public enforcement actions based on some significant failings in their BSA AML portfolios. Now, our actions are nowhere near the deferred prosecution agreements that the Department of Justice or other types of more significant criminal types of actions are. administrative, but they are public actions nonetheless, and they require the banks to go in and they address policies, procedures, internal controls, audit, everything they need to have a strong BSA/AML program. As they exit those relationships, and I would say that some of them recognized during the time that they had to address their own internal issues, that they did not necessarily have the internal controls necessary to manage the risk of some of the activities they had taken on before. What I'm beginning to see as they exit some of these outstanding enforcement actions is they strengthen the internal controls of their programs internally, which gives them the confidence, coupled with some of the actions taken by some of the home host countries to strengthen their own regimes. And they re-enter those relationships, but with a different structure, because they have elevated decision-making. We've seen that among some of the most globally active in the correspondent banking space. They have changed the governance structure. They are not allowing the staffer in the BSA department to make such an impactful decision, which is maybe done very myopically without a very broad understanding of the consequences of that kind of termination. Those decisions are being elevated. At least 2 senior management, oftentimes included in board packages, for the board to make a decision whether or not exiting the jurisdiction is in the best interest of the institution. And knowing, as a part of that package, what exiting that jurisdiction may mean. Are you the only institution left in that jurisdiction? And is that what, the last one to leave will get the biggest brunt of the impact sometimes? Or will it just be the opportunity to make sure that others have the opportunity to go and get a new relationship? But we are seeing a change in the way that we are governing and the policies and procedures that they use to make these decisions. And I think that's a good thing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that was a very lively discussion. I think we fleshed out a lot of the overarching issues. We can thank you all. If we could take a quick 10-minute comfort and coffee break and be back here at 12:15. I know we're running late, but let's try and catch up with this. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
To help be a voice for the industry, to advocate both on a state level and on a federal level. We just celebrated our 2nd birthday, I call it, and we have over 62 member companies. The industry, what we have done to help them is we track legislative and regulatory changes. As many have spoken earlier about in the U.S. and at the state level, there's unique laws at each state, so we are working to track that, help inform people. We also work at the federal level. And I'd like to think that what we do is we are helping to educate and maybe break down the barriers to help people understand and manage the risk of the MSB Association. We have our tagline, if you will, sharing one industry voice, and that is the industry voice of both the traditional remittance companies as well as the newer companies that are disrupting the traditional payment methodology in various ways. And they face both similar challenges, and we are helping to bring those together and communicate on their behalf.
Great. Now that we've finished our introductions, why don't we begin with some of the more substantive discussion? I might as well start with Mark. What is MasterCard Send? What is the network? Basically, how is it different than the various remittance innovations that we've seen? How does it help us deal with the risk?
Yeah, so MasterCard Send at its core is a push payments network. Everybody knows MasterCard for being a global payments company. So what we've really done is taken the core principles that MasterCard was founded upon and reversed the transaction essentially. So MasterCard Send is an interoperable network that connects banks, mobile network operators, MTOs, and cash agents. And our role has really been to act as that trusted intermediary, has been referenced multiple times throughout today's sessions. So by that I mean we're the hub that interconnects everything, but we're also setting a set of standards and rules that all the participants of the network have to abide by. So our cross-border product, which is combination of a recent, or not recent, but a joint venture that we invested in called Homestead in 2013. The formal product was launched earlier this year, and so far we've seen tremendous uptake from a lot of our banks, as well as non-banks, specifically digital giants and aid organizations, governments, and the real value of this is that it provides access to a wide range of distribution channels. So we're targeting both the banked and unbanked, providing both greater convenience and security, as well as choice for the sender and the receiver.
I heard the words trusted intermediary. Oliver, maybe you could speak a little bit on that subject and what you're doing with BID.
So what BID is doing is taking a top-down and a bottom-up approach to solving problems of financial inclusion and interoperability of global financial systems. And so from the bottom up, we have built and deployed a mobile money ecosystem powered by blockchain technology. So an open standards, mathematically secured and distributed ledger. So in the hands of the user, it looks like a mobile wallet, a merchant wallet, and a teller extension to the merchant wallet that allows cash and carry out services. So in Barbados, as our test bed, we allow individuals with Barbadian dollars to convert those into digital Barbadian dollars secured on the blockchain, and then we enable e-commerce. From the top-down approach, we have been in deep discussions around various pilot projects with central banks on removing ourselves from that equation as the trusted custodian of the fiat currency and enabling central banks to issue complementary legal tender instruments, again on a blockchain. Now, the blockchain can be, there are thousands of them, whether it is a proof of work, proof of stake, or federated blockchain. There are many different ways to ensure consensus and secure the network. We're not so much focused on the unique implementation choice taken by a nation. We're more so focused on providing interoperability between a heterogeneous set of blockchains. So a global settlement network, effectively, between various central bank digital currencies. So, and those two are harmonized. It's a complete alternative payment system.
Dr. Boyce, I think you mentioned that you've offered a couple of papers as modest, including the one that I have here, which is actually, I think, the most colorful one of yours, which is the discussion paper. Actually, it stands out. I should show it. If you're going to produce a paper about de-risking that's going to be this length, it's best to go ahead and have a beautiful photo of the Caribbean right on the front.
That's an odd
Definitely lends to being more receptive. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about the paper and the work you've been doing and the impact and perhaps some of your preferred solutions.
Sure. I'll try to keep it very simple and short as well. First, before I start, let me again, I think I did it a bit to my first comment, commend you for having this forum. I think there's always room for academia to explore and test ideas and test conventional wisdom about ideas in the external environment, non-academic environment, and also for the external non-academic environment to submit to the scrutiny of academia issues like these, where they can be studied and examined and pulled apart, because I think academia can make a serious contribution to how we search for solutions. That links quite nicely with the papers that I wrote. The idea really is that the consequences of getting this wrong could in no way outweigh the benefits of at least trying to look for solutions. And this is what led me to write the papers. I think each one has been written out of frustration. The first was in the definition of de-risking. That one was a paper that I published because I felt there was a lot of unfair conflation of de-risking with what was de-risking and pre-risking. And the different ideas. I define de-risking fundamentally to include the restriction of services. So when, for instance, you say refusal of supply, there would be an obvious conflict because to me it should be broader than that. And very often restriction of services can be just as deadly as wholesale severance and withdrawal of CBRs. But what led to the main paper, the colorful one that you have there, was equally a frustration with the way and the pace with which we were dealing with de-risking in the region. This quotes your reliance almost on high-level public diplomacy at the highest level of our governments to resolve the issue. And in the Caribbean Development Bank, unlike Oliver, who gets to play God in a different role, we get to play God in terms of ensuring the development funding is directly and solely delivered to the poor and the vulnerable. And we have an obligation to ensure that our development funding is able to promote economic development. In the same way, financial systems, the way they're supposed to work and the way in which they integrate with the global financial system, should not only help us to deliver development funding, but should help economic development that we promote to work. We felt that the pace in which the search for solutions was going in the direction was a bit off. And so that prompted us to write a policy brief. And then the third paper, the one you have there, is the paper that I wrote where I thought, maybe there's another way to look at this. Maybe there should be a general understanding that there is no silver bullet, that there is no one-size-fits-all response to this problem. What we should probably be doing is taking a horses for courses approach. In other words, what is the specific problem we're trying to solve in Antigua, as against the problem in Barbados, as against the problem in the Bahamas? In Antigua, it may be volume. It may just not be enough of transactional volume to America's correspondent bank being able to dedicate from a risk-based perspective the amount of compliance and other resources to maintain a CBR there. In the Bahamas, I'm just picking up on the lower here, the issue may be one of anti-money laundering. For instance, they may have recently received some adverse public comment from FATF or CFATF with respect to their compliance systems, or maybe a bank in the region, outside our correspondent bank outside the region had recently had a very bad experience with them. In another country, maybe another issue. So there was a way, I thought, to look at solutions that were bespoke, that would address each problem that may not require this overarching burdensome architecture that we all try to put in place with lots of laws that never works. And also there was a problem happening. The problem on the ground was revealed by the Caribbean Association of Banks in their study that was published in October 2016. They surveyed 38 banks in 18 countries and found that 45% of those banks did not have much of an issue. But of the 55 that did, at least 32% of those banks, or 12 banks, had lost more than one correspondent bank relationship as a result of their association with a single bank. They named the bank, it was Bank of America. By any means, by any stretch, that was unbelievable. What happened with Bank of America's involvement in the risk in the region was that if you took Bank of America out of the picture, Europe would be the largest de-risking destination. Simply because of a single U.S. bank, the U.S. suddenly became the largest de-risking destination. The survey also found that at least 4 banks had lost 3 or more CBRs. At least 3 banks had lost all of their CBRs. And that was just withdrawal of CBRs. I'm not even including restriction of services I mentioned earlier. And so the idea was, how can we produce a simple guide, a simple, not a guide so much, but a simple direction that could gently prod those who are in search of solutions at every level, the regional, national, institutional level, as to how to search for these solutions. And that led to that paper. And that has triggered a massive snowball in terms of how we go about searching for solutions. The IMF, fortunately, were able to jump on that and roll that up into their paper. You'll see in their most recent paper talks about no silver bullet and so on. But I don't want to take credit for that. I just want to say that we're all part of the matrix of ensuring that as far as possible the problem is addressed. In that paper, for instance, mention is made on one page, on page 26 of blockchain as a solution. And that was good because I think we listed 20 solutions, 20 possible solutions or approaches. There are more today, but the point is that it was just a catalyst, I believe, for ensuring that as a region we were able to say, here is one way, not the only way, but here's one way we can begin to address the issue of risk.
Ugo, I know you have a lot to say on the subject. You have such a tremendous reach and ability to speak to everyone on different sides of the spectrum, the bankers, regulators, and service providers. Maybe you could share with us a little bit of what we've spoken about, perhaps what's happening in Mexico, Latin America, and also with maybe perhaps about NBFIs and their expanded role. Or why don't I let you?
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. To some, I'm going to read your papers. I have not. I'm sorry. But after this, I will promise. And maybe contribute some information. There is a company, the MSP in Aruba, that about 8 years ago lost a bank account, challenged that bank in the court, and just 3 months ago was the court ruled in his favor in Aruba, 8 years later. And now they are discussing the damages. So I've been helping this guy, providing information only, so the lawyers have the information. So it will be very interesting because it's the only case that I know in the Caribbean of an MSP.
Which country?
Aruba. Yes. Aruba National Bank. Okay. Let me tell you, the situation of the risking in the world and in Latin America is spotty. The situation is very bad in some countries, less in others. I cannot paint just one picture. I'm not going to talk about the U.S. because Kathy here is the expert in the U.S. So, but I want to just mention certain things that are happening, which I think are very, very interesting. The courts, many banks, many MSBs, money transmitters, payment institutions, depending how you call them, in every jurisdiction, have gone to the courts. Not all of them have been successful, but there's been successful cases in Spain, particularly, halting the closing of bank accounts. There's been successful cases in New Zealand, in the Philippines, in Aruba that I just mentioned. And I want to mention this case in Chile because it's interesting. This MSB went to the anti-monopoly prosecutor to challenge the closing of the refusal of banking service of 7 banks. So the prosecutor decided to launch an investigation, and the results of the investigation are there. The paper is in Spanish, and we have a very rough translation in English. It's not a very good translation, but I just don't know enough of legalese to make a good one. But it's enough just to present the case, and the prosecutor in his statement or report, he says, first, regulator, you need to be clear on regulations. If regulations are not clear enough, so there is too much ambiguity, and just so enforcing the regulator to do this, and in turns tells the banks, we need such a length of time, very clear information of your procedures of opening an account. It's just too vague, and you're not giving enough answers, so just turns around and says. So it is very interesting because it just tell each other that the problem is here and there, and it just really doesn't move anywhere in that situation. But a bank did open an account. So I think it's interesting that what happened here. Something that I want to mention is that Switzerland, it is impossible for an MSB licensed. Well, it's not a license really, it's a registration. So it's a registration on an association, basically what the regulators admit as a registration. There's no way you can get a bank account for an MSB. I've been helping a company which is the biggest company in Portugal, Nova Cambios. It has offices and licenses in France, in Spain, in Sweden, and it's been 6 months and no bank has been able to get a bank account. So it is Switzerland, the banking center of the world. So that is happening. More just little information that I want to leave in your minds. I've been focusing on the silver lining of the risk. And there's many, many silver linings, which maybe because I'm an optimist, it just looks bright because there's just bright spots. And the bright spots are that central banks have decided to intervene. Costa Rica, a company called Teledollar, got their accounts closed by commercial banks. 2 of those commercial banks are government owned. So it's not just commercial banks. Why those 2 government banks decided to do that? Because their corresponding bank in the United States, the big banks, said we don't want money from the money transmitters in the United States to flow through our accounts. So either you close that account, or I would challenge my corresponding bank account with you. So the bank, even though is a government-owned, said to this company, I'm sorry, I can't freeze my corresponding bank account. So the central bank opened an account with this non-bank first time. But you have to get a bank account in US dollars international. You need or else, because I cannot serve as a commercial bank for you, you cannot receive wire transfers in that account. So that was my challenge, and we got a bank account for this company with an IFE. An IFE is an international financial entity. Act 273 of the Puerto Rican development law admits money transfers into any financial service institution to get a license in Puerto Rico, and you can apply to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and get an account with the Fed. There's about 35, 40 financial services companies that are now in Puerto Rico. It's a development, so you have to establish an office in Puerto Rico. Your beautiful tax incentives. Yes. Yes. And I'm looking at her, right? Because I like the bird.
She's going.
No, and so it's great what Puerto Rico is doing. They're very tough on who they are admitting, but it's an opening. And money transmitters in the United States have been applying. Okay, not only Puerto Rico is doing it. Lithuania, look at Lithuania. The whole department of getting fintechs to establish in Lithuania, get a MSB license, and in 3 to 5 months, and then in 2 months later, you apply and you can get IPIs through the 3 biggest banks in Lithuania, so you can do wire transfer. So there's openings here and there that are big. The Bank of England, July 2017, just said that all payment institutions that get the full license will have account with the Bank of England, and you can do wire transfers and all the other nicknames of the banking payments, the fast payments, STS, a lot of, I don't remember here. But what I'm saying is that there are openings coming because of this de-risking. Uruguay did the same thing for the largest money transmitter in Uruguay, who lost their bank accounts. Central bank said, okay, let's open an account for you, and you clear US dollars for us. I hope that Central Bank of Uruguay cannot be risked because doing that, that could happen. So the last thing that I want to say is that the creativity of money transmitters is amazing. Netting. There's so much netting going around to try to overcome the need for banks. And it's going back to where the industry started 30 years ago. The foreign exchange industry was netting all along. My grandfather, who was a cambista, they just had little books, So, hey, George, you're in the border, pay $10,000 here, okay, here, and then they write it, and then they got paid by the other. That's Hawala. And Hawala is a name that for a long time was had a bad meaning to it, but it's the way to just, you pay and I pay you and you pay this and that, and the money doesn't flow. Hawala is back, there's websites for Hawala, where you get people to, I'm not licensed, but you can, I put you in touch of this, and you exchange money between yourselves, and I get a commission. There's so much Hawala going on to this that my last statement here today is that it is unfortunate that because it's hurting transparency, it's hurting World Bank records and remittances. Because the flows have been increasing and increasing, and they're not recorded because they're going into so many channels. So, as I told you, the metaphor, remittances are like a river, a large river. You can channel the flows, you can try to organize it, but the risking has been just like this big dam with very little holes, and water is flowing. So yes, it's affecting remittance costs, of course. The smaller banks that are coming in to fill the void of the larger banks are charging incredible rates. Fixed rates a month, $2,500, $5,000, $7,500 just to have an account with the bank. Because of compliance costs, etc., etc. So it's been increasingly costly for money transfer companies to get back. Now, the other metaphor that I love, and this is from a person in CAFI, Ryan, he said, in the last 10 years, the MSB industry have had to change their Citroën de Chevaux, or the Volkswagen Beetle, let's say, into this sophisticated Ferrari with compliance, with technology. You know, we now have a state-of-the-art. And the banks doesn't let us use the highway, and we're using a Ferrari to go through the back streets. And I love that metaphor because it's what is happening in a way. You know, we've been pushing the industry to get sophisticated, and yes, it has done a great job in compliance, and because technology helps so much, and the blockchain is going to really change the game in the compliance part too. But if you cannot use the highway, then you have this beautiful engines, this beautiful Ferraris going into the alleys and back streets because they cannot use the highway. That's it.
Thank you, Hugo. Kathy, maybe you can enlighten us a little bit with the U.S. perspective, and also one item in particular which I found challenging in doing research, which was obtaining hard evidence of de-risking. There were a lot of skeptics. I think that's an important topic to address.
So thank you very much on that topic. Thank you for having me here. The U.S. banking of MSBs, and I would include the traditional money transmitter agents, as well as many of the new fintech companies that are out there. Banks have their choice to select who they want, what their criteria is. It is very hard. I probably get at least 3 to 5 phone calls per week of somebody that either needs a bank account or is going to lose their bank account. And while the statistic that they mentioned about the correspondent banking getting 6 weeks, some of the companies who have been banking with somebody for a very long time, maybe only given a week to 2 weeks notice that they are going to be needing a new bank account. One of the pieces of legislation that we are tracking is by Congressman Luke DeMeyer, and it's the Financial Institution, you know how they, Consumer Protection Act of 2017. They always have those on. But in that act, and that some of that is out of Operation Choke Point that was spoken about briefly, it's really asking banks to identify for the company, why are we terminating your account? Is it compliance? Is it a compliance issue that we might be able to rectify? Is it monetary? We no longer can afford the compliance associated with your program. And in many cases, as Hugo said, that the banks are charging prices. I have members and companies that say, we are happy to cover that compliance cost as opposed to losing our bank account and business. So we are supportive of that type of legislation that would actually push banks to be more accountable to the companies and help us understand what's happening. Because I think that that's a problem. But in that report, and why I bring that up, is that in that legislation, Congress asks for a report annually to say how many banks have de-risked their businesses there, because there really is no record. It's very hard to say how many companies have been de-risked, and we believe that having the number legislated, if you will, just record keeping. We got rid of X number of companies, would help to prevent, a widespread maybe global de-risking of a certain category of business, like we had with Operation Checkpoint, or a certain regional area, and we think that that's really important to do that. It is very hard to have any hard and fast numbers, I'll say. And I was speaking earlier with the woman from the CFPB on the remittance rule, and I was explaining that one of the rules, one of the things that is, they were looking for was some data, because some portion of the rule, while it was the importance of providing a consumer a receipt so that they could go out and shop their costs and things like that, really doesn't happen in the behavior of the consumer. The consumer comes in, they know what they want to purchase, they've done their research. If it's online, they really just want to make that transaction there. So what's happening is that it's a delay to the recipient in the money. So the consumer, instead of being helped by something like that, it's being hurt. We're trying to collect data. It's hard to get companies, I think, and you mentioned it, Hugo, to be able to share data. I think there's a reputation aspect that they feel that, if they've lost their bank account, perhaps it's, they will be looked at poorly by either a future bank or by their peers in the business, and they'll be using that as a marketing. This company A, no longer is banked by this company. So it's very hard to get data. I think that it's very necessary, and we're looking, to be honest with you, to do some things like informal surveys at branch and agent locations to be able to collect that data, at least in support of one of the things that we're doing with the remittance rule. We have done a banking survey of our members, and we have identified the banks that have, the risks, the banks that still do some selective MSB banking, and we have a list for members. But our initial thought when we got into this was that, we'll share the banking list with the members, and the banks basically said to me, no. So we're doing a lot of, I'll say, facilitation or liaisoning to say, this is the general information about the company, and are you interested to speak with them? And then we make virtual introductions and push them on, because banks are very selective. And one other comment I'll make when we talked about the rules before, there's very few banks that if you have a foreign individual involved in the ownership in the U.S., that they will want to even speak with you. As soon as you say, well, I have this ownership, whether that person, the company is well documented in the UK, or whatever the jurisdiction, not even from a high-risk area, they'll say, no, we don't want to do that. So they're not really managing that risk. They're just sort of, again, taking a general category and saying, we're not even going to deal with it.
I want to mention something that is interesting. In the IMTC conferences, the smaller banks that come to the conference, they ask us not to publish their name in the list of attendees because they're going to be swamped with a lot of people, and they just don't want to be denying meetings and saying no to so many companies. So we and for me it's like, okay, well, because of course marketing. If I put the names of the banks, I get more people to come. But I can't, because I have to respect the banks' agendas in not wanting to go there and be, and we know that. So when we do it with Kathy and it just try to get those banks to meet with certain companies that we feel that are needed, needy, and they need bank account, especially as I mentioned to you, from the OCC, is that Groveta, okay, Groveta, that I mentioned to you is that these I lost my train of thoughts again.
But what you try to recover, just add one quick comment. I think it's important to ask the right question. Some of the frustration I had in my early stages of trying to get my head around this de-risking thing was the simple question of what is de-risking and to whom does it matter how it's described. I'll just give you 3 scenarios, and you tell me which of these 3 really strike you as de-risking. There is a bank concerning whether it should enter a certain sector. Let's say whether it ban certain types of MSPs. It does its risk assessment, it's proper, and it decides, you know what, we can't, for reasons, whether resourcing or otherwise, we can't enter that sector. Is that de-risking? Think about it, don't tell the answer. You have another situation where a bank has done its risk assessment of an existing relationship and realizes that we can no longer take the risk of continuing this relationship for whatever reasons, resources, whatever. Is that de-risking? Don't answer. Keep the thought. You have a third situation where a bank decides, for whatever reason, we are going to exit this particular relationship, whether or not we conduct a risk assessment. Is that de-risking? That is de-risking to me. The other 2 are some form of risking. I call it pre-risking in the first case and re-risking in the second case. Pre-risking of an entity or agency or sector that you haven't entered, re-risking of someone that you have already. Whatever label you want to use, but I think it's important because if you ask banks how many customers they've de-risked, you're never going to get the right answer, if you get an answer at all. Because when they look to the regulators for guidance or their own classification, what they classify as de-risking. And I think that's what accounts for a lot of things being kept in the shadows, unfortunately, in terms of the type of questions being asked and the answers that we get. And so we don't ever get the true picture. It's really unfortunate, but I find it happens a lot.
Yes. One of the things that we're doing, and actually I would say we're less of an association that blames banks, and there's a lot of pressure on banks to comply with regulations, and there's a lot of costs, and there's a lot of changes that they're trying to assemble and put together, new products and things. So it's really a difficult scenario. We are trying to bring banks in as members, and a couple of them have as associate members. It's good for them to understand to better understand the MSP business is what I'm hearing. It helps them understand, helps understand the regular, and we're also encouraging them to come in small pieces. You can't go from like 0 to 100 without ramping up the staff appropriately. We don't want that. As much as we would like companies to, bank MSPs, and we have a lot that would be interested in it. If you come in and you all of a sudden have 100 MSPs and you're just starting it, it's not going to do the industry or overall any good. Because what it will do is give us a black eye, and then it will just further defeat the situation that we're trying to improve upon. So.
And I think having seen both sides, working with both large global banks and MSPs, I think the real challenge is that regulation hasn't kept up with the pace of innovation. So you have the banks who are very heavily regulated, and then MSPs who follow less stringent regulation, and that's almost a catch-22, right? So you regulate the MSPs to the degree that you're regulating the banks. These MSPs won't make any money. On the other hand, if you kind of lower the regulation on banks, then they now see these MSPs as competition. So I think it's really finding the balance between creating that collaborative environment where all parties benefit.
If I may weigh in here, I think my role on this panel is to present alternative lines of thinking. So just hold the judgment for a moment. Let me ask a couple of questions, or let me frame a solution. The question of de-risking is around fundamentally an inability to appropriately measure the risk. If the risk was measurable, then you can make, in a perfectly efficient market, you can make a determination as to the cost of it and whether or not the client is suitable, irrespective of what industry they operate in. So, if it were possible to have a system whereby you can identify every actor, every action, ensure the integrity of the information flowing between two parties or more who do not trust each other, who do not have to trust each other, while simultaneously protecting the privacy of the individuals or institutions. Because the level of proof that I'm talking about would be invasive on anyone's individual rights. We would have a solution on our hands to de-risking, and it is a combination of applying identity systems, blockchain technology, and basically information management systems, which can be well coordinated on distributed ledgers, but can also, as we move towards that future, be implemented in financial technology solutions that don't necessarily rely on distributed ledgers. We would have the solution on our hands. So BIT is operating in Barbados. We have been rejected commercial bank accounts by every commercial bank on the island, all offshore banks that would have an interest otherwise in giving us an account, as well as the largest credit unions. So it's national de-risking, and there was no real risk framework applied to that. We took the solution. Meanwhile, the regulators are keen to see financial technology innovation happen. So on the one hand, and the focus of this discussion has been on a change in the climate at the regulatory level, and it's refreshing to see that that's happening. It's important because without the environments to facilitate the solutions, you're in a catch-22. The commercial bank will tell you there's no regulatory framework and you're out of the system. But even if there were a regulatory framework, it's about risk management. So the other side of our solution, so we operate a digital cash network, and our network is scalable for cash in and cash out. So our immediate mission is take cash out of the financial system and replace it with digital cash. But the other side to our solution that we're offering to financial institutions is better compliance systems, biometric compliance systems, machine learning compliance systems. You have siloed databases. Part of the reason the Caribbean is high risk is because you don't know what's happening in these markets. And part of that problem is linked to the fact that the databases are not open and accessible. The data is kept on paper and large in many cases. And so this is where technology like machine learning can come in and play a role, of biometric authentication. Self-sovereign identity is another solution. We're talking about centralizing databases of personally identified information. That presents a huge honeypot and risk from hackers and cybersecurity threats. You can utilize blockchain technology to create distributed identity systems. And so really, I think that all of these forums would be much better directed, as opposed to seeking to find a solution to fixing a broken system. Facilitate capital markets and open economies, and allow them to do what they do best, which is solve problems, and the solutions will present themselves. Because from my perspective, I don't see any unsolvable problem. What I see is solutions that are being locked out of markets. And so that's where the focus should be. And you will see that there are dozens of companies each tackling these questions in different ways, whether it's a private network, a public network, a self-sovereign identity, shared databases, private databases for identity, or machine learning. The solutions are out there, and really open up the markets and provide that consumer protection by making sure the oversight is there. In 10 years' time, we'll be talking about a magnificent alternative payment system, and it will not look anything like this one. So let's get there as fast as possible. And I would like to also applaud the climate of forcing the hand of commercial banks and seeking to have appropriate risk management frameworks in place, because that definitely needs to happen, and it's an important first step.
On that note, I'd like to thank our distinguished panel for sharing so many candid thoughts and information. And the challenge that I have is I think that our research paper is effectively doubled. Unfortunately, we don't have time for any additional questions. Again, I'd like to thank our panel, and I'd like to call up to the podium Dr. Leon Perlman, who has headed our project at the DFSO, and none of this would have been possible without
Thank you, that was great. I think, Oliver, your rousing words for the future can set the stage for my comments, which are going to be very brief. There's no silver bullet, but with the individual activities that are going on at an SSB level, at a fintech level, at a regulator level, I think forums like this and papers like we're putting together, I think solutions could be made. We all stay in silos and nothing's going to happen. So thank you very much for coming together. I want to thank my team, also, Laura, Claire, Mike, Jason, and Corey outside. Professor Rob, Eddie, thank you for all your interaction. We've had some rigorous debates within our group, and I think a lot of it's been fleshed out here. So food for thought for our paper. And speaking of food, if you are staying for lunch, very welcome. And we'll see you at our next event, probably in January at this stage. Thank you very much for coming.